favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. That passes. Special recognitions tonight is what we get to start with, which is always fun. It looks like we have a good big crowd here for it. So I think we're going to start with Free State and Lawrence High Debate and Forensic Team honors. So if you want to come on up and bring your students, we'd love to have you. Okay, we'll start with Lawrence High and then Free State can come up after. How about that? Yay.
Good evening. I'm extremely proud to be before you tonight with a group of outstanding young people. A little bit of history about our program. Since the records that we have go back to about 1987, since that time, Lawrence High School has only ever had at most 5 entries qualify for the national tournament. And this year, we are fortunate enough to have 18.
Wow.
And of course, the only difference is our new superintendent. So Dr. Lewis, thank you for your influence. We really appreciate what you've done. They've grown so much.
It's all you.
Actually, I've got a wonderful assistant staff that has worked really hard, and I'm going to give them all the credit tonight. But I do want to introduce to you the students behind me and let you know the events that they're competing in. Yeah, come on over there.
What was this kid?
Yeah, and Kelly's in the hallway. He'll be in next. We'll start at the far end. The two gentlemen on the far end, Lex Moulton and Jared Cote, qualified in duo interpretation. And Jared there is also our state champion this year in dramatic interpretation. Joel Rose. Joel Rose actually qualified for 2 different national tournaments this year, both times in congressional debate. Joel is Jenna Riggins. Jenna qualified for 2 national tournaments as well. The Milwaukee tournament, she qualified in oral declamation, and the tournament in Dallas, she qualified in congressional debate. Next to Jenna is Amelia Vasquez, who qualified in Lincoln Douglas debate. And next to Amelia is Jasper Mumford, who qualified for the Milwaukee tournament in oral interpretation of literature, and also qualified for the Dallas tournament with his partner Ellie Bates, who could not be here this evening, in duo interpretation.
Well done. Good job. Good job. Well done. Oh. Congratulations. Everybody does. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Oh, that's a good idea.
Oh, you're hilarious.
That's jam.
That's what he said.
I know.
I'm not as eloquent as Jeff, but I'm going to do my best. I hope that you'll join me in congratulating our students for their excellent work and outstanding results over the course of the semester. All told this season, our team traveled 12 weekends in competition. In those 12 weekends, they earned 11 first-place team sweepstakes awards and 17 total top 3 finishes. In addition, they earned 45 individual first-place finishes, 245 other top 6 finishes, had 45 events qualify for the state championship tournament, a total of 91 times. 36 events qualified to the Forensics Coaches Invitational. 11 events qualified to the National Speech and Debate Association National Tournament in June. And 13 events qualify for the National Invitational Events Tournament of Champions, which was the most of any school in Kansas. In all of these qualification categories, the numbers achieved by these students represented school records. Our team capped off their Kansas season on May 4th at the 6A Acacia State Championship Tournament, where they earned the school's first state championship in speech. 13 of our 16 entries advanced to the semifinal round of competition, which was the most of any school in the tournament. 10 of them made it to finals. This was also the most of any team in the tournament. And as a team, they earned 361 total sweepstakes points, which was the most of any school in any classification this year in Kansas. Individually, we had 4 events finish as state runners-up, and I'd like to recognize those particular students if they'll just step forward. Spencer Yost-Wolf in oratory, Jack Binkelman in informative, Emily Bile in prose, and Alina Matichowski, who could not be here tonight, in program of oral interpretation. Finally, we had 3 students earn individual state championships. Savani Badri Venkata in informative speaking. Spencer Yost, go ahead. Spencer Yost-Wolf in international extemporaneous speaking. Alina Matichowski in poetry. Alina and Savani are also back-to-back individual state champions. You'll start, Hugh.
Thanks for coming. Congratulations. Congratulations. Well done. Congratulations. I'm not sure. Congratulations. Well done. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well done. As always, amazing. Thank you.
Good job. Good job, Savani. Thanks. Good job. Thank you.
Okay, next up is the Lawrence High History Day winners with Valerie Schrog, history teacher at LHS.
I see some familiar faces. Just kidding.
Good evening. My name is Valerie Schrog. I teach AP US History, African American History, and Link Crew at Lawrence High School. And one of the things that I get to do in AP US History is give students the opportunity to write research papers that they then transform into History Day projects. Yeah, this all began with a research paper a long time ago. We first competed at the regional competition at Southwest Middle School on March 2nd, then advanced to state. On April 27th, we took 15 Lawrence High students to the state competition and qualified 7 of them for the National History Day competition, which will be held at the University of Maryland at College Park from June 9th through 13th of this year. And we have 6, I can't count, history teacher. We have all of the exhibits, documentaries and websites that were produced, all placed first in the state. We swept 3 first place categories. So, yeah. Nationals here. We have first Trevor Ariano and Sammy Turner. They placed first in senior group websites with a website entitled Quantrill's Raid, the Destruction and Rebuilding of Lawrence, Kansas. Yeah. Next, we have Daniel Davidson and Amelia Vasquez, who, along with Mia Robinson, produced a documentary, senior group documentary entitled Stonewall, Queen Bees Are Stinging Mad, highlighting the story of Sylvia Rivera in the midst of the Stonewall events. They were aided heavily by Zach Saltz, LHS film teacher back there, whose support is amazing. And then we have Anusha Red and Mariel Salisbury, first place in senior group exhibits with their exhibit titled Exploring the Themes of Triumph and Tragedy in the Birth of the Birth Control Pill. All of them have stellar scholarship, I, as their teacher, am incredibly proud of what they have produced, and I'm pretty honored to be able to accompany them to Washington, D.C. in about a month, and to see what we might be able to hopefully bring back from D.C. So I'm really proud of you guys. Congratulations.
Well done. Well done. Well done. Sammy, nice to see you again. So I'm Stella's mom. Yes, it's nice to see see you. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. I mean, really good.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's always exciting to see the amazing things that our students do, so that is awesome. Okay. And so next up is the report of the president of the board, and just have a short report. I wanted to just kind of report on a couple different things. The city-county school district meeting has been scheduled, so that's going to be June 24th from 3 to 5 o'clock, and that will be here in our building. That is an open meeting. The public is welcome to attend. The agenda is going to be based around equity, and we're going to present on the work we've been doing as a district, and also the city. The vice mayor has been doing some research into how they can start doing some trainings and things within the city staff, and then the county will be reporting on some of the work they're doing. So I think it'll be a good topic to build it around, and it should be a nice meeting. We also have really had our first training for the interest-based bargaining. I just wanted to let you guys know, since I know that Jill and I sit on it. Kelly is sitting as an observer this year because she's going to cycle on next year. It's definitely very different. We meet collectively and we talk about items, so it'll be very interesting. We have several meetings scheduled where we're going to be kind of discussing that, but it should, hopefully, we're all very hopeful that it'll make it maybe a less contentious time so that we can talk through some issues together as a collective team instead of being in two separate rooms and not really communicating well. So it's kind of exciting that we've gone that direction. And then the last thing I was going to report on is that we did have the Douglas County Superintendent's meeting last week, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. We talked about different things. I mean, the sort of the things we've been kind of talking about, the health, the handle with care and making sure the RAP MOU has been now kind of officially rewritten and approved. But then we also talked about the county is really wanting to do a zero suicide initiative across Douglas County. And so we got a little bit of information about that. I think we're going to get some more. A woman from the health department came and gave us some statistics that I thought were really interesting. One about the increased likelihood that you'll attempt suicide if you smoke, if you vape, or if you use tobacco or marijuana. And those statistics, I thought those were really surprising. I don't know if you have any other takeaways from that data.
Yeah, it definitely was. Especially when we think about what some of our students even mentioned when they said, well, vaping is safer than tobaccos, and so that miseducation, and then just continue to communicate and talk to our parents around this idea of, yes, it may be okay for you to say, well, as long as they're doing it in my house or around me, it's okay, which is, but there's that likelihood that if they do, their chances of being depressed is a lot higher, which can lead to suicide.
And she had real concrete numbers on how many either serious ideation plans or attempts had happened in Douglas County divided by district. So for some of the smaller districts, obviously that's pretty, much smaller, and we obviously have more. But we did talk to her about maybe coming and doing some sort of form of that report for us here. I think she's going to have to maybe rearrange how she shows the data just so that it's not identifiable. But it was definitely an interesting report, and so more on that as we move forward. And then finally, I just wanted to welcome Trevor, and I'm going to try it, Ariano.
Yes.
Yes. And he is from Lawrence High School, and he's our board member today. So again, just so that you know, not only are you welcome, but you're also welcome to comment on anything that we discussed tonight. So thanks for being here.
No problem.
Yeah. And with that, I'm going to move it on over to the report of the superintendent.
Okay. Thank you, and welcome, Trevor. I love your shoes. You guys can't see his shoes. Maybe you saw him when he came out there. I do want to provide an update to the board and the public. We have been conducting an investigation to ensure the safety of Kennedy Elementary School. This started after two of our staff members reported being tested for elevated levels of carbon monoxide. Our facilities and operations staff conducted testing, as has Black Hills Energy and the fire department, and none of these tests have detected carbon monoxide. But we are working with a third-party air quality testing company to schedule another test of a natural gas-powered hot water heater at a time when the building is unoccupied. The rooftop vent to this appliance was covered during roofing repairs, but there is other fresh air ventilation to the mechanical room where this hot water heater is actually housed. We will share more information once we learn more with the board and the Kennedy staff and families when it's available. We will host welcome receptions for this week at Liberty Memorial Central Middle School and Lawrence High for new administrators. The Liberty Memorial Central Middle School community is invited to meet the interim principal, Dr. Sabrina Tillman Winfrey, and assistant principal Timothy Leffert at a reception from 4 to 5:30 this Wednesday evening in the school cafeteria. We invite the Lawrence High community to welcome interim principal Dr. Cynthia Johnson during a meet and greet at from 4 to 5:30 Thursday evening in the Lawrence High School cafeteria. I saw Denise Johnson. Where is she? There she is. I want to thank our farm to school and nutrition and wellness staff, as well as all of the volunteers that supported our second grade field trip to the Douglas County Fairgrounds last week for the Body Venture Interactive exhibit. My daughter was actually one of those, and she had an amazing time there. We want to continue to encourage all of our parents and guardians to complete the online annual student registration process in PowerSchool. This enables families to update student contacts, health histories, give other types of permissions and authorizations there in PowerSchool. We also encourage our parents and families of students in grades 6, 7, 9, 10, and 11 to return their permission forms. You know, this is the first summer that we're allowing students to take the devices home. But in order to do that, we must have a permission form from parents, and so the last day to submit that form is indeed the last day of school. Morgan Hunter, which is our substitute management software company that provides substitute teachers for our district, we definitely want to recognize Sue Vossler as the Substitute Teacher of the Year. She was named the Substitute Teacher of the Year on last week. And Sue is also a retired Schwegler Elementary School teacher, and we definitely appreciate all of our substitutes and Sue's work that she does in our schools. All of our substitute teachers, too, are a vital part of the success of our LPS team. Many of you know that I'm very competitive, so I have some great competitive news. In addition to what you've already heard, Lawrence High School won the 6A state journalism contest last week with the largest team, team competing, and definitely our journalism advisor, Bob Tholen, does an excellent job leading those students, and so congratulations to our Lawrence High 6-8 state journalism team. Lawrence High girls swimming and diving and Free State baseball and softball, they all won the Sunflower League championships. So congratulations to those teams. Lawrence High Senior, a Lawrence High Senior is the first, now get this, to ever earn an e-gaming scholarship from Baker University. And I right, basically. Say that again.
He's getting paid to play Fortnite.
Yeah, so
I know.
It's pretty amazing.
there goes me trying to get my son off of Fortnite. The argument is that I can get a scholarship. So yeah, many universities around the country are beginning with e-gaming as a sport, and so our first ever, I think this is our first ever USD 497 student to win a $4,000 scholarship to Baker, Jack Rummel. He will compete on the Baker esports team as a Fortnite and Overwatch player. Interesting. So, several Southwest Middle School students earned awards from the Kansas Scholastic Press Association for their yearbook layout, design, and photography. So congratulations to those students. Thank you to our Cans for Community. They donated $435 to each of our secondary schools after a successful April challenge to collect more than 5,000 pounds of aluminum cans for recycling. According to our Douglas County Clerk's Office, 4 individuals have already filed for school board. Of course, our incumbent, Shannon Kimball, has filed. Thea Perry, Paula Smith, and Carol Cadu Blackwood. We've asked KASB to lead an informational session for anyone that's interested in learning more about serving and running for the school board. All are welcome to attend. It will be this Thursday at 6:30 here in the boardroom. It's that time of year. Graduations are upon us, and so we invite all of our community to join us in celebrating our students' graduations. Project Search, their graduation will be at 10 a.m. Here at the district office this Thursday. C-Tran will also be at 10 a.m. This coming Friday here at the board office. Lawrence Virtual School will host its graduation at 1 p.m. On Saturday in the Free State Auditorium. Lawrence High graduation is a week from tomorrow, May the 21st at 7 p.m. in the LHS Stadium, barring no rain. Free State High graduation is May the 22nd at 7 p.m. in the Free State Stadium. And our adult learning community and diploma completion program graduation will be 7 p.m. At 7 p.m. June the 6th at Billy Mills Middle School Auditorium. I may have more. Oh, LHS Girls Track, in addition to the Sunflower League Championships, our LHS Girls Track is also our Sunflower League champion. So congratulations to all of those students, and thank you. Amazing opportunity to go on KU's campus about maybe 2 o'clock today. There were some LHS students there presenting their astronomy posters to KU professors. I felt, I'll just say this, I learned a lot. I learned a lot. I was taking notes, and our students did a phenomenal job explaining what they learned within just 1 year. There's a partnership with KU, Greg Rudnick over at KU, a professor at KU, and of course Andy Bricker over at LHS. But these students really, I mean, it was a really proud moment for me just to be in that room to learn all that they had learned. I learned about, I took notes, I probably can't remember, Z charts and high, I don't know. But I learned a lot, and it was amazing. So there again, that's just a true testament to the type of, and then the level of scholars that we have in this district. Okay. Were you going to add?
Oh, no, I was only excited because my daughter was one of them. I'm sorry. Dr. Lewis, that's my kid. Yeah.
So she's on Twitter right now.
Yeah, she probably is. Anyway, sorry.
To say that it's funny, I went to a graduation party yesterday, and they were talking about it. They were
Really?
excited for it. So
Really?
that's just a testament to
Yeah.
the teachers and the program. So
Yeah. And the KU professors were asking them tough questions, and they nailed it. They nailed every answer. So it's phenomenal. Proud moment.
Okay. Okay, so we are moving on to patron commentary. And it looks like I have Maniki Gotez and Sally Farrell. Yes, and I may have botched your names, I apologize for that. But as you're walking up, I'm going to read our patron commentary policy, which is that we welcome patron comments, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us about policies and procedures. We set this time aside to hear from the public. It's a time this is your time to share opinions. However, complaints about specific staff or students need to be heard in an executive session in order to protect their privacy. And thank you for giving us your information so that if we need to, we can follow up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your time. I've come here tonight to encourage the school board to approve funding to hire an additional fourth grade teacher at Prairie Park Elementary for the 2019-20 school year. Currently, there are 63 incoming fourth graders and only 2 sections of fourth grade, which would cause each class to have at least 31 to 32 students, if not more. As a parent of one of those students, I'm concerned of the negative effects of class sizes that large, and I'm also speaking on the behalf of other parents who are equally concerned but could not attend tonight's meeting. We all know that small class sizes are crucial to student outcomes. Prairie Park has special considerations that make it imperative our classrooms are not overcrowded. We are the only elementary school in the district to have both the autism program and the emotionally disturbed program. Our student population also includes children who are living at the Lawrence Community Shelter. All of these students contribute to the diverse community that makes Prairie Park unique, but it is also a vulnerable population that must be given equal opportunity to thrive. Overcrowded classrooms are not the sort of environment where teachers can give the academic or social emotional help that is needed and where the achievement gap that exists at Prairie Park can be narrowed. As reflected on the Kansas State report card on the district's website,
In 2018, Prairie Park had the second largest percentage of students scoring at just a level 1 on the Kansas assessments in both math and ELA of all the elementary schools in the district. A level 1 indicates a student shows limited ability to understand and use skills and knowledge needed for college and career readiness. I understand that you're tasked with the difficult decisions that must be made when there are too few funds to cover an overabundance of needs. However, ensuring classroom sizes are conducive to learning and that all students are afforded the opportunity to achieve a quality education is the most important way that funds can be spent. Class sizes of over 30 in a school with intense needs does not help close the achievement gap, nor accomplish the equity work that the district strives for. Our children deserve better than overcrowded classrooms and teachers who are stretched too thin. I appreciate your time and careful consideration of this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rico.
Next up, we have Gary Schmidt.
Good evening. My name is Gary Schmidt, and I serve on the steering committee for the Restorative Practices Committee at Justice Matters. I am here today with some folks from Justice Matters to talk to you briefly about restorative practices. We know that you are in the midst of a strategic planning process, and while we do not fully understand the ins and outs of what that process looks like, there is one thing we are clear on. Restorative practices easily fit into the strategic plan, particularly under the social emotional learning theme. Both from stories from our members and from our research, we have learned a few things over the past years. Suspensions don't work. They often have bad outcomes for everyone, not just the student suspended. Suspensions are an equity issue. Students of color are suspended at a higher rate than white students. Restorative practices do work, and they change the culture and climate of the school for the better. We saw this firsthand just 2 years ago at West High School. We invited folks from the district and the board to go with us. And we have read research articles about implementation of restorative practices in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania public school system. Restorative practices effectively close the equity gap regarding suspensions. We know this district cares about equity, and here's something with proven outcomes. Keeping kids in school, not suspended, will ultimately give them more time in the classroom, helping things like the achievement gap. We know that the superintendent agrees with these ideas, and he has asserted both publicly in a statement in the Lawrence Journal World and privately when we met with him twice over the last few weeks that suspensions don't work, restorative practices do work, and that restorative practices fit into the social emotional learning theme of the strategic plan. You, school board members, are about to determine this district's priorities for the next 5 years. Please include restorative practices. Include them because they work, especially when implemented with high fidelity. And there is teacher, staff, and administrator buy-in. Include them because they effectively change school culture and climate for all students. And include them because they make a real dent in creating a more equitable school. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more, Dr. Cynthia, and I'm sorry, it's hard to read. I don't know if it's Courtney or Cartney. Okay.
twofer. So again, we just wanted to come and speak in terms of restorative justice as well, and in support of that policy, both for our family as well as for our growing family. As you can probably see, this little guy will be going to Prairie Park and coming up through the school system. As someone, as a parent who wants to make sure that, well, yes, I'm going to teach him how to handle conflict. We also want to make sure our school system can help support that process and support his learning through that process. And with the many little friends that he's already making sure that all of them have an equal chance to come up fairly through that school system. While now I'm a veterinarian and very successful in my field, certainly I was involved in some of the disciplinary proceedings when I was a student coming up through school, and ended up having an in-school suspension when I was in middle school. And that process did not leave me with a healed relationship with the teacher I had a conflict with, and I don't really feel like I learned anything through that. Yeah, I didn't learn anything from that process. So I'm excited to see us supporting that. Yeah, I think we're all done, bud. So thank you guys so much for your time and for your support of our children.
Thank you. Up is board commentary. Shannon?
So I wanted to share about a couple of things. The policy committee met on May 6th and wanted to update you on our review of KASB recommended edits. KASB had shared some suggested edits to policy EBB and other related safety and security policies. We have shared those suggestions with staff, particularly with Ron May, and he came and spoke with us at that meeting, and we are working on some updated language based on those recommendations. The committee expects that after we review it again and staff has had an opportunity to look at it, that we'll have some revisions to those policies to bring to the board as a package, probably at the first June meeting. In addition, we discussed an update on the progress of our review regarding dress code policies in the district, as well as our work in creating a process to be in drafting our an equity policy for the district. And so that's all coming along. Wanted to note for the rest of the board and also for our community that on May 9th, the Kansas Supreme Court heard the oral arguments in the Gannon case, which is the school finance case. This was the state coming back to the court to ask that the court accept the changes that they made to the finance formula to adjust for inflation in the legislation this past session. The state has asked the court to dismiss the case if they find that those changes complied with the court's mandate. The discussion at the hearing was really about three things. One, did the calculation that was used by the legislature in fact satisfy the court's mandate? Did they do the math right? Second, there was a lot of discussion, particularly with the state attorney, about whether the court should consider retaining jurisdiction or dismissing the case. The justices that were asking questions were quite skeptical of the idea of releasing jurisdiction based on what happened in the Montoy case back in 2005 when they did that, and then the legislature turned around the next year and pulled back on their funding commitment. And then the plaintiff's attorneys were asked a lot of questions about, well, where does it end? You know, how do we not keep coming back to this place of being in front of the court? So it's a very interesting argument. The court is set to rule by the end of June, I believe. And then finally, I'm the school district's representative on the Public Incentive Review Committee, which is a city committee that includes membership from the school district, the county, and as well as appointed members from a variety of segments of the community. We review and consider a number of different economic incentive requests that are made to the city and provide a recommendation to the city commission on those. At this last meeting, we reviewed several outside agency funding requests that are set to go to the City Commission for Economic Development, the Peasley Tech. I recused myself from voting on that one because of my position on the school board and our relationship with them, but they considered one from Peasley Tech, as well as the Joint Economic Development Committee for the county and for the BTBC, which is the the business incubator on, there's a consortium that's located on the KU campus. In addition, we talked about an updated ethics policy for city advisory committees, and we also reviewed the city's 2018 annual report on economic development support and compliance. I have a copy of that report. If there's anybody who wishes to take a look at it, let me know and I will get you a copy. I anticipate that the board is going to be asked to possibly vote on an upcoming NRA request. It's an approved NRA for 826 Pennsylvania, but there are apparently revisions that need to be made to it to be in compliance with the city's updated affordable housing requirements. There's a PERC meeting next week to discuss that, and then that would be on a future board agenda sometime in the next month to month and a half, I believe. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, we're a quiet group tonight. Trevor, do you want to say anything?
What was the did you say NRA?
Yes, I'm sorry. Neighborhood Revitalization Act request.
National Rifle Association.
I should have clarified that. That was a very good question. I was thinking about it in terms of the economic development use of that term and not other uses of the term. It's a state statute that in our city has adopted implementing ordinances that allow they create a district and then people can come and ask for certain property tax abatement incentives in the creation of that. And usually they're requested to meet particular goals like rehabilitating blighted areas, infill development that supports downtown. There's a whole list of criteria that they look at. And they also have to do an economic development, like a but-for analysis, would the project go forward, but for the incentives, and also they evaluate how much return on investment, public investment will be created by approving the requested incentives. So that's what it is.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking that clarifying question.
Okay, well then, if no further comment, then we can move on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are those that are considered routine and are adopted by one motion unless a board member or superintendent requests that an item be removed. And before we get to a motion to approve it, I think we do have a retirement.
Yes, the board would like to thank Robin Dillon for 33 years of service to this community and the schools, and we wish you the best of luck.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve consent or to adopt consent?
I move the board adopt the items listed on the consent agenda.
Second.
Johnson,
Yes.
Gordon Ross,
Yes.
Ingram,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Kimball,
Yes.
Beeson.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, our first item under old business is a strategic planning update. And are you giving that, or is Martha coming?
Martha is coming.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. She gets set up. Yeah, we are excited about the work that we've done on our strategic plan. We've had teams come together and had a series of several meetings to get us to this point. We want to provide the board with an update of where we are as of today.
Great.
Great. Well, good evening, board members and community members and Dr. Lewis and team. We're very pleased to be here to provide you with an update this evening on the current progress. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Blythe Jeffers. You can wave your hand in the back, yes. So Blythe has been supporting the teams in this latest phase of developing strategic initiatives, and then she'll also be working with the teams that will be going forward in this first phase to develop action plans. So I'd like to just begin with a refresher of the overall strategic planning process. So in January and February, after a leadership overview and the opportunity to gather a lot of district data, and I'll just remind the group that this included data about student performance. It included stakeholder surveys from many different types of constituents of the school district. It also included looking at the information that was gathered during the superintendent search process and Dr. Lewis's listen and learn sessions. And we also considered environmental issues about things that are happening in the community. And a broad group of stakeholders were convened to provide some insight and to recommend some initial thoughts about the direction of the strategic plan. In phase 2, we came forward to the board with a draft set of priority student outcomes and some strategic themes to focus the work of the district. Those were then tested extensively with the community again through several large community forums as well as smaller group opportunities for input. Those were refined and discussed at the March board meeting. And then we have, in the last month, been busy with some strategy teams that have worked within each of these strategic themes to develop some objectives, some measures, and some initiatives. And that's the work that we will be sharing with the board this evening. So just as a reminder, this is the language that we left the March 25th board meeting with. So based on our review of the data and input from the community, 5 priority student outcomes that the plan would be directed toward. And these are areas where the district has opportunity for improvement and also that represent the cumulative outcomes that can represent a number of steps of progress along the way. So for example, increasing literacy by 3rd grade is a milestone that is important for future student success. And so the work under there and the measurements under there will look at what is happening from pre-K up through 3rd grade to ensure that students have this literacy skills they need. Increase math proficiency by 8th grade, again, looking at the resources and the instruction that students are receiving, with 8th grade as a milestone point at which we want to ensure that students have the proficiency they need to be successful in high school. Narrowing achievement gaps between student groups, increasing high school completion, and advancing students' post-graduation success in both college and career. We then identified 5 strategic themes where if the priority student outcomes reflect the things that we want our students to accomplish, these are the areas of district work where we need to think about ways of doing business differently in order to drive those outcomes. And so the 5 strategic themes were guaranteed and cohesive curriculum, student-centered learning, social and emotional support and safety for students, effective and committed employees, and last, database decisions. So I should point out that all of this language is still a work in progress. There'll be opportunities throughout to get feedback and to continue to refine. But after the March 25th board meeting, this is the language that we went forward with. It was very important to the community and to the board that issues around equity and inclusion and diversity be addressed throughout all strategic themes. And so the image on the right-hand side of the document is intended to show that considerations of how equity influences outcomes and how equity needs to be embraced in the implementation are going to be considered throughout the strategic plan. So since the March 25th board meeting, strategy teams were formed for each of those 5 strategic themes. Those teams first identified areas within the strategic theme that were most in need of improvement and crafted objectives around those. The executive leadership team reviewed those objectives, and then the teams researched effective approaches to addressing the objectives. In doing this, the teams reviewed all the stakeholder input regarding the specific ideas for preparing students for the future within each of the strategic themes. So as a reminder, in the community survey that was made available, as well as in all of the community forums and input sessions, community members were asked within each of those 5 strategic themes what ideas they had for specific practices or approaches that would improve student success. And so that information was coded and made available to the teams as they did their work. Additionally, the team leaders sought input from the Equity Advisory Council and the Delta Group, the District Equity Leadership Team Advisory Committee, and utilized that information. These draft strategic initiatives were shared with the executive leadership team that not only provided feedback and some additional adjustment of the strategic initiatives, but also has determined which ones they believe should launch first in the 2019-20 school year. And so as I get ready to kind of share what the group has come up with, I do want to talk a little bit about the criteria or considerations in determining which ones would launch first in the 19-20 school year. And I want to be very clear that when we talk about phasing, we intentionally do not use the word prioritization, because these are by no means are the ones that are the most important. But there are reasons why some things might precede others. One is sequencing. Sometimes you need the groundwork on certain things before you can begin work on other things. But additional factors include alignment with current district work. So some of the things you're going to see are already in flight, if you will. There's work already being done. So if we can get in front of that work, embrace it as part of the strategic plan, that's something that we want to do. Some of these things have a great deal of urgency around them in that if we don't move forward on them quickly, things are going to stagnate or perhaps even become worse. And we might see declines as a result of not taking advantage of the opportunity to move forward. In some cases, there are partners who are willing to work with the district or groups within the district that already have a lot of energy around something. And then finally is expectations. We clearly heard some themes from the community from the beginning of the process, even back to Dr. Lewis's Listen and Learn tours and input sessions, where there are expectations that the district's going to move forward on some things. And so those are also things that we might want to consider for phase one. But additionally, as we consider the whole set of things, there are some things we have to be careful to balance. And so one of those obviously is resources. I mean, at this point, the budget for 1920 has pretty much been set. There are not a lot of new resources that are going to be available. So to the extent possible, we want to look for things that we can get off the ground or continue to support for the 2019-20 year that don't require a lot of new investments. Additionally, we want to balance the workload on any particular functions. So we don't want a lot of things that are going to mean the same people are going to have to start doing some work differently. And additionally, thinking about the impact and change management, we don't want a lot of initiatives that the same people are then going to have to learn to do things differently and figure out how to implement them in their jobs. So all of those factors were part of the executive leadership team discussion that leads us to the set of things that we're going to be recommending that we start planning for the 2019-20 school year. So I realize this is a little bit difficult to see, but what we've done on these next two slides is we've taken each strategic theme and we're sharing with you the objectives that the teams identified as representing the areas within that strategic theme where we really need to focus some transformational change. And Dr. Lewis challenged us with our language here to not use language that represented incrementalism, but language that really represented these are things that we need to transform and consider how we're going to do differently in the district. So under guaranteed and cohesive curriculum, we have established an aligned scope and sequence of curriculum standards for PK through 12 in all educational settings. And we clearly heard from the community during the input that people expect and are desirous of a clear scope and sequence of knowing what will be taught and what is expected for all students in all grade levels, regardless of the classroom or school that they attend. That doesn't mean that we don't have flexibility. That doesn't mean that we can't have themes or emphases or things that are different across the schools. It just means that the essential standards that students are expected to learn are understood. And then secondly, to establish a core body of culturally sustainable primary and supplemental resources that will support the effective implementation of this aligned curriculum. So just moving forward with this one, the strategic initiative that aligns with the first one is to identify those standards to construct the following elements, which are all part of a well-formed curriculum. And to do so using the curriculum timeline that has already been established to ensure consistent implementation. And this is recommended as something that would be part of phase one. Along with that, to identify the evidence-based, culturally relevant instructional resources that would align with those curriculum standards. And you can see additional language underneath there that this would also involve taking things out of practice that aren't aligned, ensuring that we have the professional development and support for people to use those resources, and also think about how we're going to have a process to continually vet and refresh the resources so it's not just a one-time thing and then 3 years later we're back in the same place. Under student-centered learning, the first objective is to ensure student engagement and access through an effective and proactive tiered system of supports that meet students' individual needs. This was, again, a very common theme in our input sessions, both from students and from other stakeholders, including parents, the community at large, and instructional and administrative staff, that in addition to the academics, there needs to be a very clear support system for students. Strategic Initiative 1A is to equip leadership teams in every building to implement the system-wide tiered framework that's already been established with Fidelity. So the thinking here is we don't need to go find something new, that the framework has already been established. There's been a lot of support and design of that framework, but what we really need to make sure is that people have the tools to implement it with Fidelity, which would also include early warning signs of students needing support. And this is also recommended as phase 1. And then a second initiative to support that objective is to implement a common instructional framework and a comprehensive, integrated, and aligned process for teacher observation and feedback. So if the curriculum in Strategic Theme 1 represents what we teach, this is really about how we teach it, and ensuring that regardless of what classroom we're in, what subject is being taught, there are certain instructional practices that it's clear that we expect to see, and that not only do we state those, but that there is a way to observe for that and provide feedback and support for teachers. And so that's also in phase 1, because that process has already begun, and so it's really an opportunity to move that forward. And then Initiative 1C, it's been determined would wait until a later phase, is to establish research-supported common practices for authentic student feedback and grading. And then the second objective in this area is to decrease the pre-K through 12 barriers to college and career readiness, including Strategic Initiative 2A, explore and implement transformative scheduling and school restructuring, and develop and implement a plan to leverage community and family partnerships for students to explore multiple post-high school paths beginning in pre-K. I do want to clarify on this one, there was some feedback in the testing of this that this would be, if you will, kind of a European model where you were given opportunities and given assessments, and at a very early age, it would be determined that you were on the college path or the career path, or you were on this career path. And that's not the intent. This is really about age-appropriate exposure to all the potential opportunities, balancing career with college so that students can start to really understand those choices before they get into high school and perhaps have already made decisions about courses and so forth that set them on a particular path before really understanding the many choices in front of them. The third strategic theme is social emotional support and safety for students. And so the first objective is about the individual social and emotional needs of all students being affected through the implementation of effective behavioral models and interventions. So the first initiative is around a social emotional learning curriculum that would be implemented with Fidelity at each level. And secondly, site-specific trauma-sensitive student behavioral models, particularly considering looking at individualized students' needs and using restorative practices, which we heard certainly some support for this evening. And then finally, promoting and supporting effective mental health teams in all buildings. It was determined that these initiatives are going to require a little bit of a longer ramp up in terms of funding and thinking about how schools could organize to support them. So those would not be viewed as things that would be implemented, at least not in the first semester of 2019-20. And then the second objective is to establish engagement and connection of all students to their school peers and community in a safe and secure educational setting. We heard a lot of feedback about caring adult relationships for students and the importance of that in the school environment, and we also heard a lot about that from the students themselves. So the first initiative in this area is to establish authentic and caring adult connections with students in schools, which would be in phase 1. And then we also heard a lot about safety, and I know that the board has also had many community forums over the last month or two around safety in schools. And so to implement a consistent safety response program, which would include reporting, training criteria, and physical plant safety improvements, would also be a phase 1 initiative. Under effective and committed employees, the first one is about the culture. and specifically creating an inclusive and supportive culture through leadership practices that increases the retention of highly effective staff in all employee groups. And as the board may well know, the number one reason people leave their work is not because of their pay or their benefits. It's because of the culture and the climate that they're experiencing. And so this is our primary opportunity to address retention. It doesn't need to cost a lot of money if we can put the right practices in place. And so Initiative 1A is to establish a work environment where leaders support the well-being of personnel through the kinds of activities that are listed here, which would include leadership development to give leaders the skills and techniques to use to create this type of a culture, but also a culture assessment so that there's regular feedback about the school environment for the building leadership. And that is something that's recommended for phase 1. The second objective is around attracting sufficient numbers of quality candidates for all employee groups. And so when we talk about sufficient numbers of quality candidates, this means not only candidates who have the technical qualifications, but also the diverse backgrounds that we think are important, and diverse characteristics that represent the students and that represent our community. So Initiative 2A is to establish cooperative partnerships to support and extend employee recruitment. And then 2B is to redesign the current district recruitment and hiring practices with a specific focus on diversity. And then lastly, but not leastly, we have reworded this based on some suggestions from Dr. Lewis. So this has evolved to state student-driven, data-informed decisions. And the objective is to establish processes and systems to support database decisions is the second objective. And the first is to ensure instructional decisions by administrators, teachers, staff members, and students are based upon data. So 1A is to develop tools, process, and continuous education for all of these folks to use data for instructional decisions. And I should make the point that the team that worked on this was very intentional about including parents and students in this strategic initiative, that parents need to understand what the data about their students' performance means and how that affects the choices they can make about their students' instruction. But students also need to understand where they are, where they want to go, and what they need to do to get there. And then Initiative 1B is to protect time for educators to analyze and utilize data through professional learning communities. Objective 2, establish processes and systems to support database decisions. And the first initiative is really making sure, in a nutshell, we have the data that we need to make decisions, that it's collected, but also that we have consistent definitions, collection methods that are sound and reliable. We are analyzing data in consistent ways, reporting and communicating. Objective 2B is then to objectively evaluate district programs and use those results to improve, expand, or eliminate. And then 2C is to optimize the allocation of resources to schools based on research best practices aligned with student success. This is the initiative where many of the issues we heard around class size, ratios of teachers and paraprofessionals to students, those types of things would be assessed as part of optimizing the allocation of resources. Looking at that school budgeting formula and ensuring that we're making the best decisions based on what the research tells us supports student learning. And so in this arena, it was decided that Initiative 2A, that really has to do with making sure that we have the data that we need and it's reliable and valid, and 2C, which is reviewing the allocation of resources to schools, would be in phase 1. And so I will just also point out the next slide is an attempt to bring all of this together. I believe the board has this on a large sheet to look at how the outcomes connect to the themes, to the objectives, and then the strategic initiatives. But before I go forward and talk about the next steps, why don't I stop and see what questions or comments the board has at this point?
A lot to take in.
Yeah. Do we anticipate that by the time we're done with this process, at the end of June, that we're going to have that first or that last column of phasing completely filled in? Or do we think that's going to be maybe we'll have years 1 and 2 mapped out and then revisit that?
So our recommendation is that all the initiatives launch within a 3-year period.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean they all get done within a 3-year period. So if you can kind of imagine a Gantt chart, they'll start, one may start and only last a year, another may start in the second year and last 3 years. So there'll be an action plan developed for each one. I believe it is really up to Dr. Lewis and the executive leadership team. Given the time of year and the urgency of deciding which ones were in phase 1, we decided let's make our recommendations on those first. But then, yes, a separate conversation is about which would be year 2 or year 3. So I don't know, Dr. Lewis, if you have thoughts about when that would happen.
Correct. We definitely want to consider the team as well and their bandwidth in terms of rolling some of these out. Because if you just look at the phase 1, that's a lot.
It's a big lift.
It's a lot. But we believe the way that we had conversations around what should come out in phase 1 will definitely kind of set the groundwork for some of the things that need to happen in phase 2 as well.
I think the kind of at the root of my question is making sure that we don't leave the community with a sense that we have all these things we want to do, but we haven't set a timeline to hold ourselves accountable to them. So that's, wanting to have an idea of how we're going to map that out and what that'll look like.
Right. So the timeline. Yeah, we can get that.
I know some of the things, like thinking about what the Delta and EAC, I mean, I know that those equity pieces have that right there, but along the side, but I know one of the things that they said upon looking at it is, where do we see that specific, I mean, I know we see culturally diverse and diversity, but, would that be in the meat of it? Because I assure you, they'll look at it and see, like, where is that?
Yes, and thank you for that question. I actually was going to discuss that in the next steps. So I was not in the Delta E and EIC meeting, but my understanding is that much of the input that was provided was about the what's important as we think about how we implement these initiatives. So detailed notes were taken, and as the groups take these and work on the action plans, those ideas will be incorporated at that phase. There will be a very detailed blueprint and action plan for each strategic initiative that I'll go through in just a minute. That will be done for the phase 1s first. Those will be completed by the June 24th board meeting, and that's where those specific ideas that are not represented at this level will be addressed.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping that we'll do that.
And so then when you have that done, or a draft of that, is the plan to circle back with Delta and the EAC to go through that work plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something good to report back to them.
Any other questions at this point? Okay.
Okay, great. So we will be forming initiative action teams for all of the phase 1 strategic initiatives. Each one will have an owner and then an executive leadership team member as a sponsor. And I should just point out that we have identified 9 of the 20 for phase 1. So it is common that more than a third go in the first year. I think the 9 that you've identified, there's already a lot of work underway, but nonetheless, it is going to be a heavy lift. The training for the owners and sponsors on the strategic initiative blueprint and action planning format will be taking place actually tomorrow. And these are the components that you can expect to see in those blueprints and action plans. So the first thing that the groups will consider is really defining what's the current state and what's the future state. So in other words, here's where we are now, and here's what we want it to look like when we're finished, and then here's some measures for how we'll know we've reached that future state. So really doing that gap analysis. They will also be developing ongoing stakeholder engagement plan for each initiative. So some initiatives are more student-facing. Others may be more teacher-facing. Other may be more administrator-facing. So we want to ensure that not just in the design phase that we went through, but in the actual implementation, we create a continuous feedback loop with the stakeholders that are affected. So each initiative will have a specific stakeholder engagement plan that will align with that initiative, that will be included, that will talk about how input will be gathered and when, and how that continuous feedback loop will be established. Detailed action steps will be laid out with responsibilities for who's going to get things done and by when. There will also be implementation performance indicators so that we can monitor and say, here's how we will know that we've actually accomplished what we've said we will in doing the work. Budgets will be established. The teams will certainly be given the direction that there's no new money available for 2019-20, but they may foreshadow and think about some additional resources that may be required in future years. Staffing requirements, we do ask the teams to think about who in the current staff is going to have to take time in order to implement these initiatives, as well as in future years, might there be additional staffing that would be required. We also will help them think about their assumptions so that we can be very clear. We're assuming that people will want to do this. We're assuming that the work we've done so far is still going to be the right work going forward. So what assumptions are we making? Interdependencies, are there things happening at the state level, the community level, or elsewhere in the district that we need to ensure this aligns with? And then a risk assessment of the things that could go wrong, because it will, and trying to think about how we can prevent or mitigate risks. So the initiative action teams will complete the blueprint and action plans with the appropriate stakeholder engagement. The executive leadership team will review those. We will also, kind of unrelated to the strategic initiatives, be going back to the overall strategic plan and recommending some performance indicators so that the board can track progress on those student priority outcomes and the objectives in each strategic theme. And the plan is that all of that would be shared with the board at the June 24th board meeting for a final approval. I think that's what we had to present. So any further questions or comments, Dr. Lewis?
No, I think this definitely maps out definitely where we want to be as a district, and I hope you've heard some themes that that are evident in some of these initiatives of what we've been hearing in some of those community meetings. One thing that I'm really particularly excited about is, I think it's in Strategic Plan 5, where the students will, in my mind, students will be the CEOs of their own learning. And I think that's huge and definitely backed by research in terms of students knowing where they are academically so they can map out their own plan for success and knowing where they are with their data. I know a lot of times they depend on parents or guardians to help them with that. But we want them to be mindful and knowledgeable of where they are from an academic standpoint, even down to a second or first grader, knowing that my fluency is at 43 right now. My goal is for my fluency to be at 62. But for them to know what their academic interference is and what they need to work on as scholars to achieve those goals.
So we had a question about the team owners for the different topics. Is that something that you can share with us at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if we have the team owners written here.
I don't have that in here, but I think we can recall it. So the first initiative, we actually are thinking that we're going to want the same team to work on initiative 1 and 2. So even though it's two separate initiatives, the work around what are the standards and what are the resources, we really want the same people to think about that. And we're going to let them decide whether that actually ends up being one action plan or whether it's truly two. And Jennifer Besselo is the team owner on that one. On the next one, equip leadership
Can
teams.
you pause for one moment? I'm sorry to interrupt. So you see the curriculum development and design intersecting with the social emotional work and engagement. Can you expand on that a little bit more? It's not clear to me.
No. The two initiative under
strategic.
Oh, I
under
get it. Okay.
guaranteed and cohesive curriculum.
Okay, thank
Those two initiatives.
Okay.
So the standards and the resources.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay. And thank you. My trusty friend has given me the answers. And then under student-centered learning, initiatives 3 and 4 would both be owned by Leah Wisdom, but there would be two separate teams of people on those. So a different group of people would work on implementing the system-wide team framework with Fidelity, and I apologize, that has a name and I can't ever remember the letters, but
CI3T.
yes. So essentially ensuring that that gets the support that it needs and includes early warning signs, and then a separate team on the instructional framework. And then Initiative 11 is Laura Basham. Am I saying it right?
Laura Basham.
Laura Basham. And then 12 is Ron May. And then 13 is Samri Devon. And then 18, can't see my slide. 18 is the new data person,
Zach Conrad.
Zach, who I understand is going to make himself available to start working on this immediately with some time that he has. And then 20 is someone in Kathy's office whose name is escaping me. Kevin? Kevin? Yes, Kevin
Etzel, yeah.
Etzel.
Gotcha.
Then each one of those owners have sponsors and
From the executive leadership team,
team.
yes.
Of course.
So is this being implemented next year in the 1920 school year?
Yes.
Okay, so how is it getting expressed to the parents and the students?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. So also while we're working on the things I described between now and June 24th, we will also be working with the district communication folks to translate this into some language that is more externally facing, and also to work on some graphic design so that it's not so many words. You will note that between this version and the long sheet, we've already dropped some of the words, and it wasn't because we didn't think all the words were important, but we're trying to work on trying to make it more concise. So there is a parallel communication plan that will also include some graphic design and website and all those things that I don't know how to do. But we'll figure
And
out.
that was one of the things that we heard from our students early on, is that they wanted to make sure that they had this plan out in a language that's student-friendly
Right.
as well.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments at this point?
I'm excited about the progress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know,
thank you for all your work.
I'm really, really excited about it. You know, I think the only feedback that I have, and it's very, very minor, and I apologize that it's very, very minor. I would just say that in your abbreviated text for the initiative in strategic theme 3, I would make sure that you put in restorative practice in that
Yes.
abbreviated text, because it's not in there now.
Yes, yes, and we did get that feedback, so we can definitely work on picking up some of the language that seems to really resonate with people and ensuring that that is included. And as I exit, let me just congratulate the staff. They have just done so much work and have been so dedicated to get this done in a very concentrated period of time, and the quality has not suffered at all for that. They have really taken it seriously and have paid very close attention to all of the stakeholder input that's been gathered along the way. So,
And I just want to echo that. The piece that I've been really pleased with as a board member, and I have also recognized all the work that you all have put into this in addition to all your other responsibilities, is the detailed attention you've paid to the feedback that you've gotten from the board, from the community, from our staff and students, and I just really appreciate that, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
Okay, up next, we have, under new business, the Para-Educator Association of Lawrence discussion. And this is really in response to the information that was presented to us by Denise Fish at our last meeting, and her request that we allow a payroll deduction for fees. When we were agenda setting, we determined that we probably should have a conversation as a board to talk through that process. And I'm not sure if we have an administrator who is going to kind of come up and answer any questions anybody might have, or if you're gonna
It
kind of
was
do
just
that.
basically a discussion amongst the
Okay.
board in terms of next steps to either allow or not allow.
Okay, and so in essence, we can vote tonight to allow that or not allow that. So are there questions people have or concerns about doing that?
I don't have any concerns. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. So is there some rationale for not allowing that?
I mean, I think that's a good question, and I think what we've heard is that it is a step towards creating another bargaining unit outside of the teachers' union. This in and of itself does not create that bargaining unit. That would be a future board's decision to determine later. That's not what they're asking for at this point. At this point, what they're asking for is to be able to have dues deducted from their paychecks. And so I think I'm with you in terms of it seems like a logical thing to do. I don't know if there's any other feelings on it. Yeah.
This doesn't come with a staff recommendation, and so I'm wondering, does staff have a recommendation, and if not, why not?
No, I think this is, we don't have a recommendation one way or another. I think, for the most part, it's really about, I think, and Denise mentioned it last week about paras being able to budget that for one or several payroll deductions in reference to a particular bargaining unit. I think I shared with the board, I'm really interested in entire classified group of employees that could potentially be a bargaining union. Of course, we have our custodial, other classified staff that would, in my opinion, definitely need to be a part of this bargaining unit, if we even get to that point.
And I think that's really the piece to sort of understand here is that we are not approving to have another bargaining unit. That would be a discussion for later down the line. And when that did occur, or if it does occur, then that conversation about whether or not we would accept just a para bargaining unit, or would it need to be more classified staff so that there were two bargaining units. But what we don't want to get into, ideally, are several, multiple bargaining units for each classification of, food services, F&O, that type of stuff. And so, but that's not really what we're talking about tonight, so.
I think in terms of recognizing the para's request for, to begin an organizing process so that we can look at increasing or improving upon our recruitment and retention, and to potentially work toward a situation where they have met the threshold to be considered as a bargaining unit so that they could work towards securing better pay. And then some of the things that I think I heard that really resonated with me was the request for just an opportunity to have increased respect in the district, to be able to advocate for the type of professional development that's most relevant to them, and creating an opportunity for them to organize is a step in that right direction. So I think it's in the best interest of the kids and the best interest of the district to allow them to begin down that path.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I heard loud and clear when I talked to a group of paras probably last semester, in terms of in some buildings the lack of respect that paras were getting, and I think you heard that in the strategic plan is this whole idea of making sure we have a culture where everyone feels valued. It's no big person or little person. I will tell you, frankly, none of us would be here if it were not for students, and so we're all here for students. And so some of the things like respect, that's something that we can definitely address with our, starting with our building leadership, and then making sure that that's communicated throughout the building to all staff, because our paras serve a vital role in the education of our scholars. And then in addition, this idea around ensuring they have the adequate technology, where we're in the process of actually ordering iPads. And so we're addressing some of these concerns that I heard loud and clear when we talked to paras. And Samry Devin, who meets with the Paras Association on a consistent basis, definitely continues to hear concerns and pass those concerns on to us.
I really appreciate that the district has, and Samry being one of the people that was highlighted to me, making opportunity for the Para Association to feel welcomed in spaces where we might be doing recruitment, so that people could come and talk to them specifically about their experiences. So anyway, I wanted to acknowledge that and just say that I appreciated it as a board member.
Just as far as the mechanics of this go, because I agree with everything that everyone has said, and I think this is a good idea. I'm curious about the payroll deduction piece of it and whether this is similar to things that we're already doing for other employees.
Actually, we actually asked that specific question. We were basically told, and I think Dave can confirm, that kind of making that happen is a relatively
Simple thing.
Yeah,
And,
is that
and,
correct? Yeah.
and then my next question would be, have we had other requests of this nature that we haven't considered at this level?
Not that we're aware of, no.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah. Any other discussion of this? Okay, does anyone want to make the motion?
Go ahead.
I move the Board of Education approve the request to do payroll deduction for Paraeducator Association of Lawrence and members effective for the 1920 school year.
Second.
Ingram,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Kimball,
Yes.
Beeson,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Gordon Ross.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
For all you do for our students, you are very important members of our community. So I know that it's very hard work, and I just want you to know that we really do understand that what you're doing is incredibly important.
I just,
Second that.
yeah, and I think that's just opens up the opportunity just for have increased dialogue, to have a point person, as Lori has been for us, that we can come to you all and have conversation about where you think that we can make improvements, what your needs are, and what you're seeing in the school when you serve kids. So thank you so much.
Okay, up next, we have a curriculum update, and I believe that is with Dr. Jennifer Beslow.
And as Dr. Beslow sets up, she too has assembled a team of teachers to do this work of pulling our curriculum together and mapping out our plan for success over the next few years as it relates to different content areas. And as you can see, she does have some teachers here with her tonight. Some of them may have to step out a little early. We do understand that. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Beslow.
Well, good evening. Excited to be back, and it's almost a running joke that curriculum touches everything, so I seem to keep presenting with full teams, but I believe in presenting the authentic voices and giving credit where credit is due. So I'm thrilled and I'm very appreciative. I know days start really early for those here that are presenting tonight. So as we talk about the curriculum update, specifically, we've got some key areas we focused on. I asked if we could have some representation of the team. So team members, as you come and present, if you could just maybe remind the board who you are and what grade levels that you are representing, that will help with the work tonight. So what you're looking at here, I know you heard Martha reference our curriculum timeline. So this is something that we showed you last spring, early summer, and essentially this is what we're working towards in terms of implementation. So if you see the top left-hand corner, ELA, health, physical education, world languages. So that's been really the impetus of the work and resources in terms of subs, money, allocations and adoptions is part of this timeline instead of trying to do all things every year or when they come up. So ELA you'll hear a lot of. That's been a massive undertaking, as well as some health and PE components. So as you'll see, ELA will not be completely finished in some of the areas, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. So we will allocate some time and resources to finish that in the fall as math comes on board. So it's a checkered board that you literally move down and to the right in this phase 3 implementation. Common formative assessments, I'll talk about just a little bit about where that fits in the puzzle. So this is essentially our roadmap in terms of planning and design. So I'm just here just to touch base on infrastructure. So a lot of the curriculum work, we have followed Larry Ainsworth rigorous curriculum design. So you'll hear RCD process. And so part of our trainings when we get together, it's mostly a sub system where we get subs for our teachers, we pull them out, and we work in full 8-hour chunks of time. So it's quite a commitment on our teachers' parts because we all know that leaving sub-plans isn't always less work. So we appreciate their time as they come out of their buildings. And what we've been working on all year is what I say creating these building blocks of design. So what you'll see when we talk about guaranteed and viable curriculum, this is the building blocks. So we've taken all the supporting priorities and supporting standards, identified those. Some people question why you even identify standards because the state identifies them. But to give you an example, 3rd grade has 93 English language arts standards alone. So especially at the elementary level, as you're balancing 4 core areas, that's a lot of standards our teachers are trying to get through. So prioritizing them goes through an official process, and we have now these like anchor priority standards that are carried on, so we ensure mastery. So that's been a huge leg of our work. We've created big ideas in student-friendly language. So these are I can statements. These are things along with essential questions that can be posted on the board. If a teacher, principal, students walk in, they have a sense of what are we working on today. Success criteria is actually written in the design as far as what does success of this skill look like. So everything that we're doing is skills-based, standards-based instead of resource or content-based. So exciting work ahead. Learning intentions, learning activities, and engagement components are all part of unit design. Summative assessments as we build what formative and summative assessment checks and exemplar units. The most exciting thing about a lot of the work, especially as we get into the secondary level, is it's resourceless. So right now the teams have worked tremendously hard in creating culturally sustainable, standards-based units that fit multiple resources. And that's a big shift, especially when you think about English language arts that's typically driven by a key resource. So they are to be commended quite a bit for the work that they're doing. So I'll move this along. We have a couple elementary representatives tonight to just touch base on some of the work they've been doing all year. A lot of our teams have met between 6 to 8 times, sometimes monthly. Elementary spent a whole week this July with us. Darcy Krause has also been instrumental in some of the work in the back as we look at this from all angles of leadership. So with that, I will ask Chris and Courtney up to the microphone.
Hi, my name's Courtney Otter. I teach second grade at Sunset Hill. I've been there 19 years in second grade. I have 2 daughters at West Middle School and a daughter at Free State, so we're in it for the long haul in our family. I was going to show you the year at a glance, talk to you a little bit about the feedback loop, and then I'll just show you some of the work that we've done. So Jennifer, do I hit arrow key? Look at me. All right, I'm used to talking to a bunch of second graders, so being up here behind the microphone's a little weird. Sorry, friends. So we started out looking at some of the resources that we're already using in the district. In elementary school, we've got our Reading Street resource, our math expressions resource, and then we adopted mystery science. And so one of our tasks to get us started for the year was just trying to divide up those resources into some reasonable chunks that we thought we could reasonably get through in a year. So we have put this out to everyone, and we've got a feedback loop set up on a Google document. So as people are using our year at a glance, we're getting messages about what works, what doesn't work. Like, for example, in second grade, we took part of Unit 5 and moved it in front of Unit 3 to get telling time into the kids' little brains earlier rather than later. So we're going to revisit that feedback loop over the summer and maybe make some changes to our year at a glance. This is an example of the second grade team's work. When we sat down to look at our reading standards, our ELA standards particularly, we had to use a lot of different criteria, and you can see it kind of up in the grid up there. We looked at all our standards. We used criteria to decide what the most powerful priority standards would be. And one thing that was a lot of discussion was around the priority standards aren't always necessarily the most important standards necessarily, but they're the ones that have the biggest impact on kids overall. So as a second grade teacher, there were a few that I was like, oh, that has to be priority. But as we talked about the ones that really support kids' learning going on into the future, we made those decisions, and those are the ones in red. We took all of our work and put it on that beautiful chart paper, and we had all the grade levels with all of our priority standards all around the room. And we went through and we looked and tried to see, what did first grade do? What did third grade do? Had some conversations around, did they look like we had aligned our priority standards well? And so that's kind of where we ended up. Chris.
So those were the kind of working documents as we were going through things, but this is the piece that teachers look at probably more often as far as it's aligned to
what is the unit, and then the different areas in ELA. So it's reading the foundational, the literature, informational, the different pieces. So the ones that are in red are the priority standards, and the ones in blue are the supporting standards. So this is a document that we haven't had before. Third grade had 93, is that what you said? 93 standards. So it's a way to look at these in a more sequential order and to be able to chunk them up and what are we going to focus on this time. Doesn't mean we're not doing those supporting standards, but we're spending more of our time on the priority standards. They're also housed in Power School, so as you go in, you can filter out and come to just whichever grade level and content that you want. But over on the left, there's different folders, and then the folder that's open now, it shows you where the different documents are. So all of the work that we have done, they're all in there, and there's lots of different ways that people can look at those and for how they want to plan and look through those. So these are two of the ones that really look at. That bottom one, again, is that standards alignments document, and the top one is that essential questions where it has the big ideas and it's in the student-friendly language.
Good evening. I'm Amanda Levitt, and I teach fourth grade at Schwegler, so we're moving up a little bit. I first wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a background in how this is very different for me as a fourth grade teacher. This is my 14th year working in Lawrence Public Schools, and I've taught every grade level except for kindergarten. And this is my first year teaching fourth grade. On a new fourth grade team. And as a newer teacher with a lot of experience, this is very different for me. When I very first started teaching here, we practiced what I like to call potpourri reading, where we would have our state standards, and you have your delta items that we knew were going to be assessed on the state assessments. We were given those standards, and then we had to use what I like to call potpourri. Some of you will remember the potpourri of resources. And we would draw materials based on the kids in front of us and then those delta items that we knew were going to be tested. And those delta items were essentially like priority standards, like what we're looking at now. And then we've had a shift from going from that in a very holistic, potpourri kind of a look to Reading Street. And when Reading Street was brought on, my first year, I happened to be teaching first grade at the time, we were told and directed to do the curriculum with fidelity, which meant only use Reading Street, and that's it. Which is a big departure from what we had been used to doing for a very long time. So we figured out kind of priorities within Reading Street, went through a lot of trainings, just curricular trainings with using that main resource that we were supposed to be using with Fidelity, and pulled forth the things that we felt, worked for students, that were good in the curriculum, and that we were also told were priorities to use. And we've now come through we adopted that 3 years ago. So I think that was 3 years ago that we were using that resource with Fidelity. I put in quotes there. And now we are looking now at these priority standards that have basically been chosen by a cohort of teachers that have looked, like Courtney Otter was saying, vertically. So looking at, okay, what standards are in kindergarten, what are in first, what are in second, what do we see that are repeated, that perhaps the students have already mastered, that we don't need to prioritize because they've had a lot there. So really kind of looking at the scope and sequence and what amount of exposure students need at every grade level. And as a fourth grade teacher and as someone who's taught multiple grade levels, I really appreciate that because with some standards, like social studies standards, for example, you see the same standards repeated throughout grade level. So it's really nice that teachers have taken this time and put the work in to try to really think about what's best for kids. So one of the things that my colleague Jenna Boswell and I have done, and what Chris Hayes, our learning coach at Schwegler, has done, and one of my teachers, Crystal Wilson, who couldn't be here tonight, we have spent an enormous amount of time working as a new fourth grade team together to just kind of wrap our heads around how to use the priority standards in relationship with the resources that we've been given and the students that are sitting in front of us. Knowing the backgrounds that they have, that they came in when they were first graders, when this cohort of students were first graders, they went from using animated literacy, for example, in kindergarten, unless they piloted to using Reading Street in first grade. So kind of knowing those kids' backgrounds and then prioritizing what we needed to do, we've been working to essentially do backwards planning. So what we have done is we have looked at all of our priority standards and then taken the resource that we have, our main resource, which is Reading Street, and looked at some of the assessments. In Reading Street, you have the ability to give them a weekly assessment, which takes some of our students, think of an ELL student, maybe 2 hours to do every single week. Why would we spend that amount of time assessing the student rather than instructing the student? So we decided, instead of using the assessments just as they have come to us, that we would kind of basically shred them apart. So what we have done is we have looked at all of our standards and looked at the tests that we've been given, but then compared them with the priority standards to see if the resource actually matches these standards that we're needing to teach. So within that backwards planning, you'll see in the next couple of slides that Jenna and Chris will talk about as well. We work together as a team to look at all of these assessments and to look at the bottom to see what common core standards were addressed, to compare that with our priority standards, and then to choose items that we were sure were covering those standards that we needed to cover, and then plan backwards based on that, so that we knew that our instruction would match the assessment, and so that we knew that we were giving the appropriate amount of instruction for the things that we were expecting mastery with. So rather than, trying to teach everything with the resource, choosing the things that were most necessary and most appropriate for the students in order so that they could achieve meeting standards, and then showing the progress. And then I'll let my colleague Jenna do some talking about what she's created.
My name is Jenna Boswell, and I am a 4th grade teacher at Schwegler Elementary. This is my 2nd year teaching. And these standards really helped provide structure for me as a new teacher, feeling overwhelmed with learning about all the ins and outs of teaching effectively. These priority standards really helped me isolate exactly what I need to be measuring in terms of student progress. And I was able to do that on an Excel spreadsheet. So as you can kind of see, like Unit 1, Week 1, because of Winn-Dixie, it would show all of the priority standards that we as a team decided that we were going to evaluate. So these are the products of assessments that we created as a team to maximize our representation of the priority standards. And I was able to kind of create a spreadsheet of all of those standards represented, and then see how students were doing individually on each of those standards per assessment, and then evaluate student and class-wide progress and make instructional decisions accordingly. So those priority standards really helped us as a team maximize our efficiency and effectiveness in instruction. I feel very fortunate to be working with such passionate and knowledgeable educators who took the time and effort to help mentor me as a new educator in being the best educator that I can be, and to work in a really excellent team. So, yeah.
This team really did pull together, and they have lots of different strengths that really support one another on what they're doing. This is a look at some of the messy work. So when you're looking at the graphic on the left, shows one of the weekly tests. So when you're coming back and trying to figure out which one of the priority standards work there, it's just very messy. We did a lot of color coding of which standards are being done where. The one on the right was just a tally, so we could help strategically plan out to pull a very quick pre-assessment. What do we need to get from our kids? How can we do that in the shortest amount of time to know what they know, who knows it, and then what do we need to do next, and plan for differentiation and instruction for that too. So it's a lot of messy work. We've kept all of these and may do some tweaking for next year, but it's a lot of work to be able to put these all together, and they've done an incredible job of really working to make sure that they're providing what those kids need.
Thank you. It's just evidence, I think, of the teams of if we can provide some building blocks and some of those basic infrastructure pieces, our teams are there, they're hungry for that, and they need to run. So the more we can do in the behind the scenes, the easier it makes their job. So thank you. The last thing I want to brag on elementary really quickly is they have really dovetailed with all content areas instead of just staying in the English language arts lane. But social studies has been an area of need for a while in terms of some curriculum and culturally sustainable curriculum. So we have really gone in a very progressive direction in that we're not looking at adopting a resource. The resource that we currently have is not being used much at all because of a variety of reasons. But instead of going a textbook direction, we are working with Glenn Wiebe, who's a state and national presenter through ESDAC, and it's paid for through Greenbush, so we're getting that as part of our contract. But most importantly, he's leading our team through working with a new standards coming out in what we call an inquiry design model, and it's a pretty clean, structured template that's somewhere between that traditional approach of resource-based instruction for elementary and project-based learning, and it's starting to really teach students how to think about social studies and critical issues instead of what to think like you would get in a textbook. And that is, I think, that healthy shift we need to make. It's not addressing just resources, it's addressing those problem-based skills and how students grapple with history in different perspectives. So that's a really healthy move. The team has started to draft and lay out of 3 major units, 1 per trimester. They're really working on 1, and so they will finish that work this summer and have 1 ready to load and implement for next year. So that will be some ongoing work and support. But again, that team has covered so many bases in such a short time. We're really proud of them. So the next thing I want to do as we kind of transition into secondary is recognize Rachel Smith is a jack of all trades. So she was really introduced to our district as a tech integration coach. And I loved and was so excited. One of the first conversations she had is that, oh, it's not about the technology, Jennifer. She said, technology comes like last. And I thought, ooh, I like you. So she has really been instrumental in leading some curriculum work even outside of the ELA components. So we were fortunate that with Jerry Kimball's blessing, we kind of pulled her and tag teamed some English language arts leadership that she's helped me with. So I asked her, because a lot of these ideas have been from her, and then in combination with the teams, they've just exploded in some really exciting work, 612. So if I could introduce Rachel Smith to come talk about that really quickly.
Good evening. I'm just going to talk to you very quickly about how we came up with the focus for the language arts design 6 through 12. Middle school and high school teachers are a kind of a different breed. We are very content specific and very expert in the knowledge that we bring to the classroom, but we also often find ourselves slightly isolated. There's not as much collaboration, and so those expert teachers and those innovative teachers don't always have a platform to share best practices. So when Jennifer invited me to this work, having worked in both high schools and seen the expertise in both of those buildings, I knew that her challenge would be in bringing 2 very different schools together to work towards a unified vision. And so one of the things I thought of was, if we could have teachers find a focus, a year-long focus for each of the grade levels, and then build from there, they could come together and really perhaps come up with some exciting vision. So the 6th grade team sat together and decided that when 6th graders show up in middle school, that one of the biggest things that they are faced with is change. And from there, their ideas just started to explode. And so I'll let you look at what we have here, but 6th grade was change, 7th grade was culture, and 8th grade was communication. And in that process, they then chose at least 4 units that they would develop as exemplar units for the rest of the team to share back. But each of those 4 units supported that overall focus. And again, questions and ideas just started to kind of flow naturally with each of the teams. By 9th grade, we often see in textbooks that, and a lot of choice novels that teachers use in the 9th grade, is that it's very much about identity and learning about oneself, one's family, the school and community, and how you fit in and how you contribute. And so they just started developing also units that would support that exploration of self. And then 10th grade decided on the global community. And 11th and 12th grade is a little bit of a different issue because they are all semester choice courses except for American Lit. So every junior must take American Lit. But then after that, they have a lot of choice for the next 3 semesters. And so coming up with a unified focus for those grades was a little bit more tricky. But when pitched the idea, they got really excited, and they chose impact and transformational action. And the units just started to flow from there as well. So that's how we came up with themes. I'll let each of the teachers then share the work that they did.
Good evening. I'm Laura Leonard. I teach 6th grade at Liberty Memorial Central. And we are, like, the 6th grade team that has been working on this is super proud of what we have come up with. We've had a fabulous time working together and taking the opportunity to actually sit down and collaborate and pick each other's brains and see what happens. So what I have on the screen for you are examples of our essential questions and thematic questions for a couple of our units. So really looking at that idea of change with 6th grade, but also how do we empower our 6th graders to look at who am I, how do other people's perspectives influence who I am and how I change, how does literature impact my world, and so really looking at it like as their first experience with secondary schools and how do we set that foundation for all of the secondary language arts teachers to come after us, looking at how does what I read influence how I read and what is my role in the world. We've done a lot of work with summative assessments that are really looking at how can I focus on changing myself through social emotional learning, how can I look at how can I change my community through social awareness, what are things that I feel are important in my community that I want to stand up and help make a change about. And then looking at our 4th unit being how does the global world change me, especially as we are leading into 7th grade and they're focusing on cultures through 7th grade, not only language arts, but also social studies. So also trying to make certain that our students are globally aware of who they are and how they relate to not just themselves, our school, their community, but also how do they relate as global citizens. And so that's really kind of where we've gone and looking at a variety of different resources. We are still working on identifying resources to utilize. It has taken us a lot of time and energy and effort out of our classrooms and working together as collaboratively as we possibly can. So I'm really happy to hear that we get additional time to continue looking at resources because I'm really excited about those things that we can do.
Jake Montgomery was going to share 7th grade, and he popped out. So the 7th grade team did the same thing everyone else did and prioritized standards and came up with essential questions. And I don't know if the board is familiar with that process, but an essential question restates the priority standards so that students and teachers know exactly what's to be taught, what skill is going to be focused on. And I love the direction that every day is centered around the skill that is supposed to be taught today. But in creating thematic focuses and questions, we also go beyond skill and into knowledge, deep knowledge, critical thinking. But it's the application of those skills that where we see that happen. And so each of these teams have really thought about what does that look like? What kind of learning can show us skill, but also deep knowledge, the cultural connections, the social connections. And so as they went through this process, they started clarifying what the learning objectives would be, what kids should be able to do, and then also what does it look like? What's the success criteria? How would I assess that? What kind of learning activities support that learning and focus that learning on a daily basis? When we teach to a resource, we don't always teach to the skill or to the big picture of learning because we're so focused on getting through that resource. And so these teachers, every single one of them, agreed to let go of resources. And that's a very difficult thing for people who have taught at the secondary level because you love what you teach. So that I think is one of the biggest and best takeaways of this whole process is that they agreed to let go of that and just embrace the collaborative nature of thinking about what could be if we let go of what we've always done. So the seventh grade team, they are amazing. They all are, but they just kind of went on a hyperdrive here, and they started creating units, and they actually created in these slides resources, banks of resources for teachers who pick up this unit to teach it. And so one of the things that the skills and the standards tell us is that students need to be able to do close reading, to find textual evidence to support meaning and message. And so they have a folder that you can click on that is full of resources on how to teach close reading. And that is a very difficult thing because we're not taught that in undergrad, how to teach close reading to students, not typically. And so then they have all of these resources already built and ready to go for teachers. And they're building banks of common formative assessments that might be used. And they'll have those resources available as well. So again, it's really exciting to see what they're thinking and where they're leading and where they'll take other people as they share these units. Is it linked?
Oh,
It
nice.
is.
Okay, well, I'm Elizabeth Stevens. I'm at LMCMS, and I teach 8th grade, and I'm happy to be presenting this evening, if I can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay. So when we were developing the curriculum, we were thinking about, don't want to do that. It's making me log in, but I can just talk anyway. Yeah, we were thinking about the focus being on communication, and so all of our units that we've created focus on communication. Obviously, it's kind of a two-way street with communication because you're not just outputting information, you're also inputting information. So the focus encompassed, of course, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, but also responding to others, being able to synthesize others' information in a way that is appropriate and respond to that in a way that's, of course, appropriate as well and not too painful for the students. So this is an example unit that I'm going to show you here. It's not logging in, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I actually have a copy under mine. So I'll just chat through this since we don't have a visual. This unit is called Let Me Tell You, and it focuses, it would be the first unit in a series of units, and it is about sharing information. So 8th grade ELA, we're focusing on developing a strong idea to express, knowing the audience, selecting suitable and inspiring words, of course, interesting vocabulary that makes sense, and also developing a voice. And specifically in this unit, we're trying to teach them the responsibilities and skills that go into being a responsible communicator. So is this a no then? That's okay.
Unless you want to try it.
No, it doesn't matter to me. So how should I do this?
Just talk through a big picture.
Okay. Alrighty, we chose our priority standards, and there were quite a few, so I'm not going to read them all to you, but I will read you some I can statements because they are pretty brief here. I can write a narrative that's structured and detailed. I can present my findings using sound claims and evidence with verbal and nonverbal skills. I can demonstrate my understanding of figurative language. I can use specific evidence from the text to illustrate my understanding of it. I can use my own knowledge to infer what the author intends to communicate. I can analyze techniques an author used to generate a reader's reaction, and I can converse with a variety of people about what I know. Obviously, those are not standards, they're just objectives and targets, but in kind of student-friendly language. That's what we're wanting them to get to at the end of the unit, of course. So our thematic questions are, how do we communicate? Why do we communicate? What's the best way to get my point across? And what if the author chose a different method of communication? So what we've decided on is there's a variety of kind of formative and summative assessments that we can get to at the end of things. Formative, obviously, in the middle of things, and summative at the end. Our summative assessments, we have actually 4 of them. The first one is a literature circle or novel study. Obviously, that encompasses the reading and the speaking portion of it. There would be a sort of a smaller, more informal discussion included in that, and that would just be based on whatever the teacher prefers to do, novel study or literature circle. A formal discussion being more like a Socratic seminar. And this would be obviously a demonstration of someone's spoken skills and ability to respond to other people, or their peers, I should say, in an appropriate way. A written response to an advertisement, and that would include kind of some practice with code switching and being able to see in the advertisement what language was used to persuade the audience, the writer's voice as well, and just some identifying types of things. And lastly, the most exciting part of this, I think, the most exciting summative assessment is giving them a prompt that's fairly benign, like how I get to my house or how to walk to my classroom, and they need to write that in several different ways and voices. Like how would your mother tell you how to do this? How would you tell your friends how to do this? How would this be written in a newspaper, and so on? And then they can kind of practice those. I should say not practice, but demonstrate those skills at the end of that. Our formative assessments, probably very similar to things that other people have suggested. Avid discussion, non-linguistic representations like concept maps. Advanced organizers, obviously Kagan and cooperative learning strategies for retrieval, poetry writing, chalkboard splash, it says here, exit tickets, short quiz assessing individually priority standards like we saw before, and then a summary, as we said, in the different styles, we could summarize things as a practice in that way. And we have a variety of resources that I don't think I can go through here, but they're short stories, poetry, and novels that are from different perspectives that we could read as possible resources. Did I miss anything? Okay, thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna Wright, and I'm not going to lean. I teach English at Free State. This is my first year at Free State.
And I'm Jeannie Merritt. I teach at Lawrence High School, and it's been over a decade, and I'm going to lose count of how many years. So, yeah.
With not repeating ourselves in mind, we are continuing the exploration of identity in 9th grade. So what our colleague mentioned about 6th grade and change and navigating change and who am I and who am I individually and collectively in a group. So there's a lot of words up here that we've seen already and we've heard. But I think that the thing we wanted to focus on, and I'll let you speak to this too, is variety of text. And what we mean by that is variety of voices and honoring new voices. And so Rachel is not wrong that a lot of our conversations have been like, oh, I love this text and I'd like to keep teaching it. But our conversation is also, I'm really tired of teaching this text, and so are my students. And I'm hearing a lot of feedback from my students where they're hungry to read new things and have new experiences. So do you want to add anything to that?
No, so it's been wonderful to work with both high schools, and been very, very proud of working with the colleagues, because even though, yes, traditionally English teachers like to hone in on one text and want to hold on to it, the ability to move beyond that and think, okay, what else new can we bring in? What voices are missing? What do we need to expose our students to? What makes them a better global citizen and able to read across multiple areas has been fantastic. But that has been a common theme in all of our meetings, is talking about how we need more resources and more voices at the table.
Or maybe just to approach a classic text in a new way. And our students are volunteering some of this information. You know, sometimes we're not asking for their feedback and we're getting it anyway. And we are also trying to be mindful that sometimes we do too much driving, and we need to bring them in more on that. And I guess the other thing I'll mention from this slide is just the idea of commonalities between the schools, us coming together. So we're new friends, and we are wanting to work together as the two high schools. I guess there's a virtual school. Again, I'm new here, so whatever I'm saying that you're judging, stop. So one of the specific points we've been making is common terminology, because from classroom to classroom and school to school, sometimes we'll be talking and all of a sudden we're like, oh, is that what you call it? So we want to bring some equity there. Here are all of our units: identity, questions. You get it. Do you want to add? I'm not trying to belittle our work. We've been working very hard, and we are a small representation of a team that has been working with us, and it's been great. And everything that you're seeing here that we're kind of moving quickly through has taken a lot of time and effort. So you know that, but do you want to add anything for this?
No, it's been nice to watch how who am I, when we started with identity. What was nice about developing these units is it didn't happen in isolation or just the 9th grade teachers. We immediately started working with the 10th grade teachers saying, hey, where are you going to take this to, so that what questions could we come up that would naturally bleed over to 10th grade?
Yeah. Wow. Look at that. And I saw the other team had draft diagonally across there, so I wanted to do that. So if you'll notice that this is a draft. Okay. Oh, I thought the mic cut out. I was like, who's turning this off? Okay. So thematic questions, priority standards, objectives, success criteria, how are we assessing learning, and we're currently working on common assessments, formative and summative, and then you'll see a list of resources there. So we have gotten to geek out a little bit about texts that we love.
That would be absolutely fun. They've also talked about, with the summative assessments, we've also talked about creating a bank of summative assessments as well as possible rubrics and showing what the good, successful implementation of, that unit, so that a successful student at the end will be able to do X, Y, Z. But it doesn't always have to be the exact same assessment for every single class. So the teachers have some flexibility, so they can pull from a standards based question test, so it's not like just for that particular resource, but they're questions that are based on the standards, or they can pull from a PBL unit, or they can pull from a writing assessment as they see fit that would work for their students.
Okay, next steps. We are currently in the process of collecting and reviewing textbooks, and we have some that are coming in and are already in. So as teams, we're just taking some time to select a textbook for 9th grade for the 2019-2020 school year. You want to add anything?
And then also next steps would be looking at those summative assessments, the options for teachers, as well as creating those rubrics, so that even if a brand new teacher comes in or someone new to the district, or a teacher who has always given just a general test and wants to switch more to PBL and problem-based learning, can possibly take that rubric and know and be well supported in what would look like a good, successful student. We go on to our next one.
Thanks, 9th grade, for setting that up for me, because I don't have to say as much. Hello, I'm Kylie Wright. I teach 9, 10, 11, 12 at Free State. And what you see here are the priority standards that we decided on. And I'm just going to tell you our priority standards and then our unit questions. So we decided on citing strong evidence, determining the central idea, determining point of view, evaluating argument. We talked about how language functions in different contexts, so audience. These aren't in particular order. This is a screenshot of, we started with priority standards, then we turned those to essential questions. Other priority standards were participate in a range of discussions, present information and research, write arguments, write informatively, and use technology to publish, update, and present. And then here's a screenshot of our first unit. So each unit looks like this. Unit 1, how does my individual lens influence my view of the world? Unit 2, what are our shared human experiences? Unit 3, how do we identify and challenge oppression? Unit 4, how do we affect change toward a hopeful future? And as you can see, the idea here in marrying the two schools together, because English 10 and English 11 and English 12 all had semester courses at Free State. So that was epic tradition, world literature, appreciation of literature, English 10, advanced English 10 that we were marrying all together. So we worked on possible anchor texts where teachers have choice of what anchor text to use and then possible supplementary texts. But that's underneath the unit question and the essential question. As Jennifer mentioned, that's where the switch is focusing on the units first and the priority standards, and then thinking about the texts. Thank you.
I wanted to point out another thing that Jennifer has made a priority with this work. The college and career ready standards do not focus on genres or like a short story study or a poetry study or a novel study. Instead, they're very intertwined and interdisciplinary, so we should see that literacy across all subject areas, but those skills should be applicable in any type of reading or writing or speaking that you're doing. And so as we were creating these units, something that was a huge shift for our teachers, both 6 through 8 and then 9 through 12, was the idea of creating units that were not specific to short stories or not specific to a poetry study, but that it's specific to a question or to a focus, and then it's skill-based. And so you bring in, each unit must have reading for informational text. So any nonfiction text must be incorporated within the unit that supports that learning goal, those standards, and then the questions that we're asking students. And so then also we have reading for literature, so it's all the literary works, fictional works, and that could include poetry, short stories, drama. And then it also includes writing. So you have to incorporate writing opportunities in every unit rather than have just a research writing unit at the end of the semester. So it's very integrated, and it's a very different approach. It also then makes your units a little bit longer and a little bit more involved. And we see that they've already started thinking about how to increase the complexity of units over a year. And that's a big shift to think about what that design looks like rather than what the resource looks like. The biggest challenge that we kind of hit was when we decided to start talking about the 11th and 12th grade band. And the group started with American Lit. And before they chose the years, they just wanted to start talking about what kind of units they would build around American literature. And I wish you guys could have sat in that meeting, because the questions that were starting to come out and the ideas that were starting to formulate were really powerful. But they came up with 4 units that will actually be in the first semester, and then they'll be repeated in the second semester, and then can be used as focus for every elective course as well. But the idea of beliefs and morals, reason, imagination and creativity, and questioning the status quo. And using those as kind of the basis of how they might, in each different course in the 11th and 12th grade, could help align a focus and a clarity in those courses. Again, still very much rooted and founded in standards-based instruction, but then this is kind of the art that the teachers spin those standards and skill-based learning.
Thank you. I realize that's, a little bit in the weeds, and I appreciate you kind of listening that you can kind of see a K-12 piece. This team has just worked tremendously. It's been really hard. Special recognition for our 2 high schools. They had very different list of even course offerings. So we had to spend an entire first semester, department chairs put in over 16 hours with members of administration, Rick and I, to really just comb through what are we offering, what does an equitable curriculum look like. We've had a high school that shifted an entire genre of literature and curriculum down to a different grade level. So it hasn't been easy, and so I want to commend them for that raw, authentic showing up again and again to tough meetings. So one thing that we have been very mindful, even from the beginning, in determining core values of the work that we're doing, is diverse literature. And I think the high schools have really centered around that and have really put their money where their mouth is as far as what they're looking at. We have spent a lot of time, as I know you've heard about, the cultural relevant rubric that, if you can see, it's been renamed to Sustainable Resource Criteria. And we renamed it because rubrics still felt kind of like a policing tool. You kind of of fall in love with a couple resources, and then at the end you kind of vet it. Just didn't feel authentic. So one thing that we've switched is our approach to how we use this, and it's resource criteria. This is how Lawrence Public Schools operates. And so I'm really excited about the team as we look at our resources. We're not even bringing resources in if we have some concerns about meeting this criteria. We've also switched that we have pre-selection criteria in that blue upper right-hand box. There's 5 big questions, and this has been vetted again and again and again by several really strong teams in our district for it to really come out, as well as some external resources. But this is tough. Like, the rubric is literally 7 pages, including the resource glossary. So we have tools in place. The samples that they mentioned are out in the high schools. You don't get to look at the textbook unless you take a resource criteria document with you. So we're really being intentional about how we're using that and making sure when we come to the table, that rubric is filled out. So we're really holding tight to that as a value and not just a piece of the process. Mark has also done some training at Lawrence High, but in effort of speeding things along, he agreed to go ahead and step out. So Denise has a few things to share, and then we're just going to wrap up with next steps. I realize you've been at it a while.
But before we get there, I do have a question about the high school ELA. I'm not quite sure how to ask it. But we have AP classes in English. We will have concurrent college classes in English. So how do these standards intersect or impact or are different in just in a general sort of way?
That's a great question. So 11, 12, 9 and 10, we realized since we got started later, we couldn't roll out and execute without having a good feeling about the work. So 11, 12 is not finished. And so we have decided as a team to go ahead and prioritize 9 and 10, get some anthologies adopted because they're not wrong. One of the resources at Lawrence High may or may not have my name in it from 20 years ago as a student. So there's just older resources that need some attention. So we're being intentional about 9 and 10, making sure that that has legs, not that it'll be fully implemented, but it has legs to start. Teachers can start working those resources, and 11, 12 will continue on. So some of those 101, 102 classes that we're going to have to work with KU, we're going to have to examine their syllabus. Dr. Burns-Wallace, we met today, and she assured me that there is room for making sure that our standards, priority standards, are implemented, as well as some of the key components like KU Common Text and English 101. So those are still conversations that we need to have with our teachers as we lay out what those units of study look like. But you're not wrong. Some of those upper level courses are a little trickier as far as how you make sure priority standards and KUs. So you're absolutely right. That's going to have another layer of just navigating. So great question.
Thanks.
Good evening. Denise Johnson, Health and Wellness. I want to share with you what's so exciting for me to sit back. Amanda and I were just kind of reflecting on all of the work that ELA has accomplished with all of this. And what is wonderful to hear is health and PE have exactly the same thing. So when you hear that we're working on priority standards, the exact same thing. Essential questions, we're right there. So when you walk into a gym or you walk into an ELA classroom, you're going to be seeing the essential questions on the board and the I can statements. So it's just really refreshing to hear that we have all of that common language that's going to be happening across the district. So I have a leadership team for physical education that has been meeting this entire school year. We have worked also on the framework. We are quite a ways through. What you see in front of you is actually health, and Amanda's going to share a little bit of that for you. But just kind of an example, you heard some of the different educators today talk about essential questions. For an essential question for physical education for our K2 friends would look something like this. What are some different ways you can move across the gym floor? And an I can statement would be I can skip, hop, and gallop, using, again, vocabulary words that are very specific to that grade level. So our next steps, we have completed most of our curriculum framework. We are working on the success criteria, and then scope and sequence will be our work this summer, in addition to into the fall and what that looks like. And my leadership team also is working on those increase of PE minutes that I know Kelly's looking for, and also resources and equipment and so forth. So I'm very lucky that I get to work with a wonderful group, and what was so refreshing to hear is Free State and Lawrence High, when I first started this position, is like, okay, we don't talk as high schools, but what has been so wonderful with this process is we are really working together as educators, knowing that we have the same common language and curriculum, so that's really exciting. In addition to physical education, I also work with all of the health educators in the school district, and the state of Kansas adopted new standards this past September for health and PE. And I feel extremely privileged to introduce Amanda Vale to you. She is FACS teacher. She's taught elementary. She's a mom of 4, and she's still here tonight. And she is going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing with FACS and some of the different components that are changing in middle school.
Thank you. I first want to say I feel very fortunate to work with Denise. She allows us all sorts of opportunities to collaborate with the other FACS teachers and to work on our curriculum, which just ensures consistency across the board for all of our middle schoolers. As a FACS teacher, we teach all 6th graders, we teach about half the 7th graders, and all 8th graders in the school year. So we see a lot of the students. As a former ELA teacher, I loved hearing a lot of what they talked about and how well that ties in with the health curriculum and the FACS. We talk a lot about who am I, how do all of our aspects of health impact each other and really work together to form our overall well-being. So health is no longer just addressed as physical health, but we spend a lot of time on social and emotional health, mental health, as we see that that is a need that is becoming more apparent and emergent. So we are trying to address and adjust our curriculum to address the needs of our students. Our 7th grade nutrition and personal wellness class is an elective semester-long course, so we have to be mindful that we don't see every student, so we can't put required content there that we want to make sure every student gets. However, we have done a really very targeted work on making sure that we get lessons and content in that we feel are important that fall more under the wellness. So nutrition and wellness used to be what people thought of more as home ec. It's become very much how nutrition fuels our body. So the physical aspect of the food and the nutrition, they still get to cook. They love that part. But we also talk about vaping. We talk about time management. We talk about goal setting. We talk about all sorts of things that have to do with social health, emotional health, mental health. So it's not just what it used to be. We're trying to change with the times and integrate that. Actually, one of our most recent lessons was on composting and talking about the global, how do I fit in the global community. They had an assignment to research how they, as one person, can make a difference, and ended up, some boys wrote and performed a rap about composting and food waste. So that made my former teacher ELA heart very happy. And on the way to school, my son was saying, nobody's going to write a poem, Mom. Nobody wants to write a poem. You've got to let that go. And I was like, just watch. And that's what most of them chose to do, was write a rap and perform it out on the pavilion. So that was fun. The 8th grade course is a career and life planning, and that is going from a quarter to a semester, which we are so grateful for. We've kind of jammed all kinds of stuff in there. Junior achievement falls under that. Our sexuality lessons from the health department and Willow falls under that. But we've really felt that sexuality part needed more time and attention, and so we've incorporated lessons on sexual harassment, sexting, communication in relationships, all sorts of things there. But with the full semester, we're hoping to be able to further expand our work with career cruising and the individual plans of study. So we're going to hopefully learn more about that this summer as we work on the scope and sequence for career and life planning. Trying to think what else. Sorry, I tried to go as fast as I could.
I think that's good. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I apologize for our time this evening, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. I think this is evidence that there's a lot of curriculum work being done, but we also honestly have a lot to do, and I think that's just a realistic message to be transparent tonight, that we haven't maybe done some of the curriculum work along the lines to the extent and structure that we're doing now. So while we're talking about curriculum that's evidence standards-based, I think it's okay to say this is a little unusual that we're getting this far into the weeds, but we're excited, and the sustainability piece will be the next challenge. Just a quick big picture, common formative assessments. We had an excellent 2-day training, lots of teacher leaders empowered in that group, and that will be implemented next year as we talk about writing teacher-written common formative assessments. So not those textbooky kind of assessments. So that's great. The big picture on a common formative is it's a dipstick. So it's a teacher kind of dipsticking, checking progress. The idea is that reteaching happens, collaborative instruction happens with, hey, Ms. Kimball, wow, how do your students do on question number 2? They blew that one out of the water. So it gets teachers dialoguing about student performance so we can increase capacity. So this is a research-based effective practice, really high statistical feedback as far as visible learning. So next steps, we kind of identified some of them. So big picture, English language arts is going to continue to move on. Elementary has a pretty good system and is going to proceed. Middle school is really close to implementation. High school is finishing some components. Our challenge, I was really honest this morning with Dr. Lewis, is just going to be making sure that we sustain and have those accountability pieces because we have had some false starts in the district. So I think just owning that and making sure, I think what's different about our curriculum is that it's not tied to resources. So we still have some things to clean out of maybe what potentially we've had in the past that isn't any longer good practice. So we talked about that as part of our strategic plan. You reach in and you pull some things out as we implement what priority and supporting standards that our district approved are, resources. And then math launches this whole process all over again. So it's exciting. The common language is a huge piece as we think about everything from principal components and leadership to the teacher level. But I think our parents will feel a sense of transparency to the curriculum that we maybe haven't been able to roll out in the past. So social emotional health standards are also up next year. We're going to do a lot of work with our world languages. We've got some leadership identified in that realm as well. The neat thing about social emotional health, we've got some good legs underneath it, but we need to audit and review using our curriculum alignment process. But this allows, we have conflicting reports about some of the resources, positive action, and connect with kids that you might have heard about. So this allows for the process to be not about the resources, but actually about the standards and how we're meeting it. So if our current resources aren't meeting it, let's talk about why and what those needs are. So we'll also partner with our Strategic Plan 3 Action Committee for that. Patrick couldn't be here this evening. He has an event in his building, but he just wanted to share that the reviews in these pathways have already taken place from architecture and construction down to biomedicine, and there's implementation of new courses happening next year. So those pathways I know are always changing on him, but he's been working hard on his level to make sure that those pieces and those courses are out in front of our students. New curriculum standards coming up is computer science, so he'll be leaning into some of that work. And the last slide, Denise is going to join me. We had a little triumvirate of power team planning about how we can address phase 2 of middle school schedule with some of those elective and CTE courses.
And you just heard Amanda talk a little bit about how career and life planning is going to increase from quarter to semester, and we're really excited that that's going to happen. It has been a class that we've been putting a lot of things into. And Dr. Besselo and I had this wonderful opportunity to meet with Patrick Kelly and to talk specifically about what this Perkins grant could look like and how that grant could help not only our CLP class, but really to be able to help our elective wheel as we look at middle school changing schedules and next year having that opportunity to really investigate what some of these new electives could look like. That's going to take some time. It's going to take some funding. And what this particular grant, every bit of it is about that sort of wheel, is looking into and investigating what different careers could be, what these different electives could look like. So we're really excited that he brought those opportunities to the two of us and all of the different hands-on components that could look like.
All right, so we'll stop. I know that's a lot of information. I realize we've taken a lot of your time, so I'm here for questions, but I also respect that
I do have,
8:20.
I have one question. Can I jump in? So just real briefly, you're right, it was a lot to take in. I would like to understand how, one of the things, so I understood a little bit about the process and how who was involved in it and how it was communicated to internally to the teams that were working on it. So there are presumably other instructors who were not part of the work that you were doing. So what is the step for you all in terms of communicating to the people that you work with and your colleagues? How do you share the information about what you've done to make sure that you're not the only ones doing this excellent work, but that you really do have collaboration beyond the scope of the people that have been at the table?
Absolutely. And that's where I feel like our work has broken down in the past, just being really transparent. So the good thing, I think at the high school level, we have such big stakeholders, and that was intentional. The more stakeholders we have at the table, the harder the work is then, but the easier the implementation and sustainability is. So I feel pretty good about where we're at with high school as far as rolling out. Some of the documents that we have captured are going to be part of the induction, all of the products, I call them sanctioned documents, is going to be a really strong component of new teacher induction. So as we onboard new teachers, this is the viable curriculum that we talk about. We talked a little bit about just building capacity, making sure our coaches feel comfortable as they're helping answer questions, but then the sustainability needs to roll out. We've carved out half a day coming back. Last year, a model that was really popular at the secondary level is to have 6-12 content teams. So our middle school and high school folks, this back to school professional development days, getting in a room and talking about that vertical alignment. Well, now they have some real teeth to talk about what's being onboarded. But we also realistic, you don't come in and say, here's your curriculum, right, like a week before school. We've been talking about communication components all the way across the board. So what's going to come out this spring, especially for middle school, is, hey, this is what's coming. These are these big units. These are your options of texts and novels that will be district adopted. We don't have the novels yet, so I can't say that we're going to implement 100% this fall, but that would be that onboarding, and then come back in the K-8 professional development in the fall and come back and really talk about those expectations. ELA should be fully implemented no later than the year after next, that fall. They should be cruising. We've talked even at the high school about probably being able to implement in January. 7th grade, to Rachel's point, has said, no, we can do this in the fall, and we're just going to build all these resources out and give these teachers these folders so they have lots of options. I think it's a realistic push-pull. But the other thing is we've talked about whether it's a district tool of walkthrough, just to really examine and capture, are these components being taught? Do our staff feel comfortable what that looks like other than a half-day, 4-hour onboarding session? I think sometimes it gets into philosophy or a little bit of some of the resources if we have resistant staff members. So I think we have to really be intentional about the why, why they don't feel comfortable teaching that unit. The way that this team has created the English language arts, it's going to push teachers if they're hanging on to certain texts that don't fit that, because I think between affiliate voices in the room, we've been very mindful of what's good for all students. So I'm very comfortable sitting down with a teacher who's not comfortable as intentionally as the units have been built and asking why there is some philosophies. It's a shift for Lawrence, a big shift for Lawrence. So I think that we just have to look at sustainable professional development. Our department chairs have been strong advocates of what they think could work and not work. So we've had lots of meetings on a leadership level. But I don't think that it's going to be flawless, like anything I end up presenting up here. So I think the work is real, and it's going to take a while to get exactly where we want it.
All right, thank you.
As you've gone through and especially as you've worked with the high schools and you were talking about, you had one high school that took an entire section and moved it from one grade to the next, and you've looked at those classes. Have you also looked at, from an administrative standpoint, of looking at the course catalog and thinning out that course catalog and even updating what courses are available or will be available as you go through this process?
Yes. So career cruising, we did all the updating with the courses. We did shave some things off. We've also said if a course doesn't populate, British literature is one that one school is offering, another one wasn't. And so we said, okay, we can continue to offer that, but if it doesn't populate, it's not going to be held. So populate current enrollment at one school was 8. So we said, we can't justify that, especially when we were thinking about concerns about some of those gen ed classes sitting at, high numbers, high 20s. So that's been a realistic conversation. I cleaned up the career cruising books. So, and Patrick Kelly did some of that work with me as I was kind of onboarded into it. So that piece is there. We've just talked about potentially using even Carl Perkins' grant. Denise and I and Patrick were kicking around, is career cruising the booklet that we actually should be looking at. Our counselors are asking for something else. So we have talked about potentially next year really reviewing a different option of a course catalog that's a little bit more student and user friendly. The committee, department chairs especially, I probably would say they weren't really interested in disbanding or omitting any classes at this time. But we did talk a lot about if one school offered it, the other one had to. And those conversations weren't always easy. And I think both schools would do some give and take. So I don't want to undermine that work because that was really hard. And it's personal sometimes. So that piece is a realistic stretch. We've also been talking about tech integration and progressive standards, and so some of those skill-based, are we prepping them for their future kind of conversations with the communication skills and such. So we've gotten over a lot of humps, but I think there's still some things we'll continue to vet.
Yeah, thank you.
Shannon, you had a couple of questions?
I did. As we're moving past the standards piece of it and looking at the resources, are we finding that we can get resources that are digitally available for students rather than purchasing textbooks? In the past, we've had instances where we've heard complaints from parents that there aren't enough materials, especially the high school level. And so if we have digital resources, then we don't have that issue. And is that a consideration anywhere in the resource review?
Yes, absolutely. So we have even shifted a little bit with some AP U.S. government textbook that we pushed through. We have upped our numbers of what we consider classroom. There was a 11 to 13, 14 number was like the magic number before, and we've upped that to a full classroom set. We've also heard and tried to listen to our students that not all of them like the online component. So we've talked a lot about what is a hybrid option. I think it just comes down to money. So we've been trying to be fiscally responsible. The things that we have been adopting are typically one-to-one online access and then a classroom set of 25 to 30, knowing that a student might need to check one out and take it home. That seems to be pretty productive, but our ELA department chairs are pushing on me. They said, Jennifer, kids want to hold a book. So I think a hybrid of both really needs to be the answer, but it's hard because you can't predict what 2 years from now wants. We're seeing more students saying that they're interested in online access. We're trying not to go back to the days where they're carrying, 25 pounds of books on their back as well when they go home. But I think being realistic about what that looks like, and for example, an AP class might be something that they need daily access to, and another class they don't. So we're being mindful. I think our vendors will do whatever we ask. We had a couple glitches that we're starting to overcome with iPads sometimes don't run Flash, and some textbooks were Flash based. So they've been hustling. Vendors are catching up. Publishers are catching up. So we've looked at that. So I would put money on the fact that we actually have a lot of online licenses that aren't being used because of either perceptions or philosophy. But we're getting past that now. So.
With regard to the actual standards, 2 quick questions. With the history standards, are those the new version that's kind of being promoted by the NCSS as this is the kind of the next generation science standards of social studies? Kansas hasn't adopted them yet, so I'm just curious as to where we are in that. What standards are we using?
Right, we're using the new standards for the work. They're a bit broader, which is frustrating, especially for our elementary team that is just come on, with everything that they're balancing. They're a bit broader, but I had a long conversation with Don Gifford, and actually we brought Don and our elementary specialist in to talk with our elementary team, and so he was great. He's like, you can use these. They haven't been voted on, but we're really close, and our consultants using the new standards. So our teachers are like, thank you, so we're not coming back.
Is Don with the state?
I'm sorry, yes, Don Gifford is the state social studies consultant.
And then how did the National Human Sexuality Standards that we chose to use a number of years ago, how do those fit into the work that is being done with the health and...
It fits in perfectly. As a matter of fact, as we are addressing... I will say, I think the others have heard me say that I did not realize I was going to take that job on until right before I interviewed, but I've never been more proud of a document to be able to implement as an administrator and as a teacher. It's a very solid document. As we're looking through new textbook adoptions now for health, one of my very first questions is how are the sexuality standards used? I think most curriculum and health companies right now have kind of a hybrid, as Jennifer was saying, of the online and textbook, but also some of them will say, we have an insert that is for just sexuality, because as you know, across the United States, different school districts feel different ways. So honestly, I'm really seeing some good information, but I feel really solid even where we are right now with curriculum with our sexuality. We're using some authentic resources and presenters from our community in addition to text. So I'd like to kind of keep that same model going.
And then my last question, I promise. So I know that our review chart is kind of tied to the state review standards.
Right.
And I also know that every once in a while the legislature decides they want to get involved and tell us that we can or can't do something, or we won't. So just, I guess this is less a question, more of a comment, just thinking through what happens to all of this work if we face that circumstance, and have you thought kind of, okay, how would we deal with that circumstance within the process that we're building? Because this is fabulous and wonderful, and I wish that more of our policy leaders at the state level understood what it actually takes to go from what the state board adopts to what our teachers are doing in that classroom every day, because I don't think they have a good understanding of it. So when those conversations happen, it always really scares me. But I guess I just wanted to bring that up as something to think about in our process, and how would we adjust if that were to become an issue, or like with the computer science stuff. Now that we're suddenly going to have to add curriculum and coursework around that, and so how does that fit into the work that we're doing?
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking that, because I think a mistake that a lot of schools make is that we do some curriculum work and it sits on a shelf and we're like, we're done for the next 7 years until the state rolls out new standards. I think that's what's gotten us into a little bit of trouble, is that we haven't revisited that. So I think that's where our strategic planning is coming in, that we had talked about. The team that I worked with was really adamant about, we need to make sure that we are really giving resources to, even if it's a quick revisit, to get A, teacher feedback, and B, to also examine what do we need to change, because some of these are just tweaks and shifts. And even when Kansas went from the Common Core standards to Kansas 2017, it's like a 15% shift, if that 10. And they had crosswalk documents, so some of it's not as monumental. I think what gets you in trouble is if you abandon the work for a few years, and then teachers are going to go where the most progressive resources are. And so if we don't provide that leadership constantly and the time and space, and then to a couple board members' points, getting it back out to teachers, I think you'll get that independent contractor mentality at time, because I think teachers are surviving. So I think we're trying to own that leadership bandwidth to make sure that we're revisiting and providing time and space.
And as part of this process, are you collecting data about how much time you're spending, so that if the need arises, we can then use that in an advocacy role?
Thank you. We have, in terms of, I know like Dr. Stubblefield will say, okay, when we plan budgets for the future, she's like, give me your days, give me your hours. So that's something that we turn into Jerry and Anna. And so we have an idea of like what it is we need to attribute in budget. So we could pull that back out in terms of line items of what we've used or what we need to use. I think in our case, ELA, we needed more time. And so I think you'd have some members of the team that say, we want to go faster, and some members of the team that say we're going too fast. So I think just respecting all angles of that, but the curriculum, I think, it's living and breathing. So just in making sure that we keep it as a priority, I feel good with a strategic plan, because it will force us to stay in that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to all the teachers who've worked so hard on this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, next up we have the budget update with Kathy Johnson.
Good evening, Kathy Johnson, Executive Director of Finance. Today we'll give you a little bit of a budget update and some kind of some direction or consensus that we need from you all so that we can kind of move forward. Excuse me. The first thing I just wanted to kind of remind you is our very overview kind of timeline, and that Shannon mentioned a little bit earlier tonight that courts had their briefs, they had the hearing. We're kind of waiting for that Supreme Court ruling. The bottom line is they've already passed kind of the ruling or the law that's going to show our funding for next year. What we're really kind of waiting for is it enough? Will they go back next year? And will the courts kind of hang on to the decision and wait and see, or make sure that the legislature continues to fund what they said they would in the bill that did get passed. So assuming everything falls into place and the state gives us our budget documents kind of in our normal time fashion, we would expect to do the budget publication July 22nd and then come back to you for the budget hearing, the first board meeting in August. So that'd be the kind of the second board meeting in July, and then the turnaround for the first board meeting. And that would be our normal kind of timeline for doing those things. So just kind of as a reminder, I wanted to share or remind you kind of what was in the funding for us with the Senate Bill 16 that was approved and the governor approved into law. And so as a reminder, it's an estimated base state aid per pupil of $4,436, and we've projected as the district's new funding for next year of $3,848,158. Just wanted to kind of remind you that the state printouts have a different estimate out there, and that's based on a moment in time in which, and only on information they know at that time. So the purpose of their printout is really not to say, here's how much money you have next year. The purpose of it is to apply the rule changes within the bill based on certain facts at that point in time. Here's how it would pan out. You need to go back, districts, and make sure that it still fits what 1920 looks like. And if that recalculates, it recalculates to a different number. But the formula, you've been able to kind of see how it works. And so the differences that we have in particular is the new facility weighting is 0 in 1920. And the way they presented it shows that we would have it for next year. In addition, they did it based on the SO66 moment in time, which is our September 20. Since then, we've had some auditing. And so some of that has also panned out as far as changes to the amount that they would estimate. So what we typically do is run through the Form 150 based on those moments in time. And so what the next slide will show you is kind of, it's busy, but basically it's the detail of our Form 150, starting at publication. You can see what we published, kind of walks through all the parameters of our Form 150, base state aid, what the dollar amounts estimated to be at publication. And then we also have kind of what our planned spending is, because we know we're publishing high. We know that we have been told by the state, you need to publish high. You need to adjust and make sure that you've encompassed your permissions in your publication. So we've done that when we publish. And you'll see that as we then get to our SO66 moment in time, which is the September 20, that number has changed. There's a couple of significant changes. One is the virtual school went from what we published at 6.2 down to 4.9. Virtual school doesn't cut off enrollment like the brick and mortars do. They keep enrolling into September. So when we're publishing for budget, we really don't have a solid number of what they're going to end up with in enrollment. We have to be able to publish high enough that we catch all the enrollment, but know that if they don't get the enrollment, we don't get the dollars. And all it is just permission versus actual authority that you're going to spend. So that in particular is a big decrease. The other thing that you'll notice is special education is going to remain until June the same number, because we won't find out until June what our special education funding is. So then our next moment in time is our audit. And you'll see that it changes again. And our audit usually ends up being anywhere from December to the first part of March. And you'll see some of our weightings have changed as a result of audit. You'll see special education is still there. You'll see that this number has continued to drop. By the time we actually get through to June, it should be, hopefully, close to what we planned for. It's possible it's going to be less than what we planned for, and the reason for that is we plan for some catastrophic aid and some things that don't look like they're going to actually happen. So our special education, when we actually get that number in June, may put this 5.1 down below 4.7, which our planned amount was about 4.7 when we built our budget. That may impact our deficit in the current year when we get there. So right now, that's kind of where our moment in time is. We've submitted the transportation information to the state sometime in early June. We'll kind of get another legal max, which will kind of then revise these numbers again before we know what this year looks like. So when the state does their printout, they have to do it at a moment in time. The moment in time for the printout was January, because that was the governor's proposal. Since the governor's proposal was approved, they just used the same moment in time of January. It's at the SO66 stage. So when you look at what's out there on the state, they have a weighted FTE of this 14,093.8 in order to get the $4.5 million they say is an estimate for Lawrence the next year. Reality is that's not really accurate because we aren't going to get this new facilities. SPED is still in limbo. The number is less, but that's because our base state aid went up. So the dollars are the same, you divide a different amount in and you get a different number, but it still hasn't been adjusted. They aren't using our actual audited virtual, which is 4.8. So you can see that they're using the SO66 column, and we actually know that this was our unofficial audit, and for next year, we know this number is not going to be there. So when you pull up what we needed or what we did to adjust for what we think we're going to get next year, you'll see that there is no new facilities. I can't do anything about special education to a large degree because I don't know what that's going to look like, but I did try to take that into account. And I have to use what I know is the audited at this point as far as a starting point. Those weightings might be different next year. They might be high, they might be low, but we start with using what our audit ended up being. You'll see that that's where my projection has ended up. These are somewhat fluid, but these are, they've held, basically, they've held since we've started using the estimate. But it's a moment in time, and you have to go through these worksheets, and you go through the Form 150 with all those different changes each time, and you recalculate where you go. So that's why the state is different than what we're projecting, and those weightings, we won't have new facility next year. So that has to come out of there, and that does do a significant drop there.
Can you give us a little more information on how you think it could possibly impact our deficit spending?
If special education comes in with and drops our planned spending below 4.7, and we spend something in excess of what that state aid should have covered for us, I've spent more than my new resources.
So it will
And if I have to
increase
spend
our
more,
deficit
then it
spending.
creates
Okay.
deficit. Anytime you exceed resources, you've created deficit.
Okay.
We're hoping that it'll come out, but again, I need another month before I'll know exactly where that's at. So again, it's fluid. We've tried to keep it. We update this as we go along. We try to use the most current information we have, but unfortunately, school finance is not one of those things where the number you start at the beginning of the year is what you end up with. It's what you end up with, that last month that kind of fine-tunes it. So we are doing what we can. We're projecting based on what we can, using history and all those different factors that we've tried to use to make it as close as we can, but it is a guessing game. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. But I did want to share this because it is those different moments in time, and what the state has put out there is different than what we're projecting or using, but there's a reason for that. And we have to take that into account, or we would tell you you have way more money than you do, and then you plan for that, and then you end up in a pickle.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a result, one of the things that we shared with you in April was some of the staffing needs that were surfacing. And as a result of that, we kind of talked about, can you come back with as budget neutral as possible? And what might that look like? And so that's kind of what we worked through the last few times. We've had some conversations in our Budget and Program Evaluation Committee. We've had conversations in ELT. We've tried to look at ways that we can at least come back with something so that HR and principals can kind of move forward. If you need me to, I can pull out some of those threshold things for elementary. But basically, what you're starting with is what we've been sharing, in that it looks like to meet current thresholds, it's about 12.0 FTE in order to just kind of do our current. So in order to try to move forward with that, making it as budget neutral as possible, it would be absorbing all of our contingency pool at elementary for hotspots, 7.0 FTE, and all of our secondary contingency pool for hotspots of 2.6. What we would try to do then, based on our needs assessment in our Title IIA federal grant, is write in some class size reduction FTE of 3.0 in order to help with hotspots if we end up using all 12 when it comes down to where they actually are.
Do you know how many we used this year?
We used all of our contingency this year and had to go into Title IIA. So that 7 contingency is actually permanently becoming part of. And so if you were really looking at, of the 12, 7 is the contingency we permanently need to use forward and ongoing. The 5 is that kind of extra based on, but that doesn't give us any for any hotspots that surface in the fall. There are a couple classrooms in that 12 that are real borderline. I think we talked about this last time, and you can note where when it gets just one over, it does create another section. The 12 kind of take that into account. So that conversation of just because it goes over one, do we actually split into 4 sections, or do we leave it in 3 because sometimes that volatility will turn around and another child will leave and you're right back under threshold. So that may be a future conversation as we move through, but this is kind of taking those thresholds for what they are based on the estimated or projected in enrollment. I think our next step will be to kind of keep fine-tuning that with kindergarten roundup numbers and those kinds of things. Move into next August. So if something changes too dramatically, we'll come back and talk to you again.
Kathy, can I ask a question about related to contingency funding and class sizes? So as a board, we've started to get emails related to class sizes around the district. And when do we actually, for the parents that are contacting us about this issue, when do we really have a good sense about the number of kids that are going to be in a particular classroom? That really isn't until August, correct?
In their seat.
Yeah, okay. So the level right now of projection is still based on the real numbers that the parents are counting. So, I mean, the real students that the parents are counting. So it's sort of this weird conversation to have with the community.
If you recall, we took kindergarten through 4th. We moved real numbers up, and then we did kind of RSP's kindergarten estimate. And then we kind of re-looked at that and compared it to RSP, and we tried to err on the side of the bigger kind of class size in order to just try to take into account everything we could. Knowing certain schools, we end up having kids move across town, and we get those surprises on the west side. So we tried to take all that into account as we, and Sammy's been in constant contact with the principals to just try to see what's moving. And so we're looking at those just regularly to try, and this will just allow the principals to say, hey, yes, we do have the teacher to be able to put into that class in order to make sure we stabilize it. So I think that's where there was some angst right now because they're really not sure if we can say, yes, the teacher gets to be there.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Can you remind me what the threshold is again?
They're different based on some of the buildings.
Oh, that's right.
And it's based on grade levels.
That's right.
Kindergarten through 2nd and then 3rd.
That's right. Yep, that's right. That's why I couldn't remember what it was.
And I can pull it up, or the April 8th board meeting and closure has
That's right,
the
I
detail
remember.
for that. And so based on that extra 12 sections, we do have to deal with the sections of art, music, and PE at the elementary. So the estimate just for current, this is not changing how those are calculated, just to keep current the way it is, we would need about, or they're estimating about 1.5 FTE there. We've determined that through the integration specialist, the savings, because they're through attrition and reassignment of those, they're kind of going back into learning coaches and some redesign of that FTE won't be replaced as integration specialists. So we're going to roll that into staffing, and those kind of wash. If you recall, if we apply the current ratio to the high school enrollment for next year, there was actually a drop in the FTE of 2.96. We would use that savings to help with the elementary. High schools have been able to look at their schedules, feel like using the staff that would be assigned to them, they can make all of that work. The middle school, when we applied ratio based on what they were used to, it would have been an increase of 3.868. The schedule changed. There was a lot of conversation about, let's look at this different because things are different. Kind of go back, forget ratio, just apply teachers to your schedule. Really look at that way and kind of just step outside your box of norm. And they did that through a lot of conversations and found out they can actually make it work with the teachers they have this year and don't actually need that increase of FTE. And class sizes were not significantly changed. And the areas that they had pickles would have been the same areas they had a pickle whether we did the ratio or not. It was just kind of how the schedule fell. And so I know they've had multiple conversations. Anna's had a lot of conversations with them and HR and feel like we don't necessarily have to add that FTE. So that kind of took that out of the mix. And then the virtual had some FTE that they wanted considered, and we kind of said, kind of go back and look at your budget, see if you can do that within existing. And they are doing some instructional resource changes. And as they've done that, realized was rather significant savings in how they were looking at that and the renewal. Significant enough that they can cover the 3 FTE that he is looking. He needs a couple of high school teachers to really kind of help with their ratio, and they're in need of another counselor at the virtual school. And so that kind of becomes a wash, but that's what that looks like. So when we look at just the staffing ratio of kind of this direct support, remember the numbers up here include salary. It also includes the 8% of employer costs, our medical, dental, and vision fringe benefit that staff get, as well as the 403B staff get. So it's total cost to the district, not salary specific. As a result, you can see the additions, the reductions. In this particular one kind of ends up with a net reduction or excess of a little bit of savings of about $35,000. Any questions about this? This is kind of more the direct instruction, and then there's another page.
With the Title IIA grant money, would you be able to use those teachers at any schools or only at our Title schools?
It's any schools, and actually we wouldn't want to use it at our title specifically necessarily because we got to be careful we don't supplant. So we don't want to do that. But the way that grant's written, it's class size reduction. So we would be able to do it in whatever school needed to based on us no longer having FTE and them exceeding a threshold that we set as a district policy.
Okay. I got to tell you, I'm really concerned about completely eliminating our contingency pool. I mean, I understand the budget reasons for having it drafted this way, but year after year after year, we've always needed, it feels like anyway, more contingency teachers than we have. And I know we won't get more funding next year if we have more enrollment. So the only way that we get to deal with that is if we have contingency positions.
That's something you can choose, in a motion to add FTE beyond what we're sharing here when we get done, and you can have that discussion. We've tried to do this as budget neutral, but this is what it would look like. And if it's a really strong, board consensus that you want to create a little bit of a pool, then that would be something that direction as to what we did. Okay. Any questions with this particular staffing ratio component? So the next one is related to some support staff restructure and really trying to target those ones that were kind of I don't know whether it was most needy or just most kind of vividly in front of us that we really needed to look at based on where we were with some things. The first one is increasing our curriculum director from part-time to full-time, and knowing that we need to do that to truly meet our strategic plan and objectives for our curriculum theme and all the work that you just heard about, and needing the FTE to make that happen. We also have a Power School team coordinator position that was kind of structured this year, mid-year, and it really involves part of our HR payroll because it was that supervisor basically moved into that position. HR went without. In order for us to keep that position forward, continue progress with Power School, it's a continued cost to the district. There is a vacant position in IT that will help offset a little bit of that, and then based on that shift, HR payroll has looked at how to restructure within there and has created a net savings in that dynamic as well. That kind of helps cover the cost of that. And then as we've replaced our executive director of research, evaluation, and accountability, or your testing person, there was a significant savings there. Basically, lots of experience, longevity kind of left, and we were able to use that savings. There is a slight net add with this particular restructure, but there was the savings on the other page, and the net together is actually just a really minute net savings, but it comes very close to budget neutral. Questions on this particular page before I go to the kind of the summary? Okay. So on our summary page, we know we still have compensation packages as far as salaries for all of our employee groups. We have kind of the adds and the reductions for that staffing ratio page, the add and the reductions for the restructure page. Kind of a net savings is that $1,068 approximately. We know we still have deficit that we're working through and having to navigate as we pull into year end, and we know fringe benefit premium renewal is the $1,075,000. Additions to date, reductions to date show that we've spent or the funding requirements to date of $2.5 million. Our new funding being the 3.8, it does leave remaining resources of $1.2 million. Sorry, I don't. $1.2 million that we haven't committed to anything yet. And there are other budget considerations we're kind of reviewing, trying to again look as much budget neutral as possible with some of those areas. And just know there's some other things that may come up in discussion, just like what Shannon shared is, if you're not comfortable with not having a contingency pool, then we would have to consider that as coming off of those remaining resources, and we would just have to navigate down whether we can find anything to offset it again, or whether we're, as we pull into year end, part of what we'll be doing going into next year then is deciding where those program evaluations need to be, targeting some of the very specific areas that we really need to look at, how to think about our staffing differently at elementary or those kinds of things, and see where we can create some savings that can then help drive resources in a different direction, whether it's something here or through the strategic plan and the different initiatives. And this is kind of, that budget committee's work will be a lot of what that one theme is as far as validating resources and redirecting those into those priority areas. So that's what this is. I don't know if you have any questions regarding that. So if there's not any questions, then what we were looking for today or tonight is, is there board consensus on the options presented? And if so, then HR and building administration will move ahead with the necessary hiring, and the staffing changes that we've presented here would be built into the budget document that you'll get later. You may choose to actually make a motion of something to the effect of what I wrote there that would be a little more concrete. If you want to add something or change something, we can do that as a part of a motion. So that's kind of where we are. Questions, discussion, thoughts?
Do you already have those 3 contingency in that grant, or are we still waiting to find out?
They're working through the needs assessment. They're confident that they can build that into that particular grant. Okay. The carryover part of the grant, I think this year and next year, is going to some PD for curriculum, but the new grant itself has the ability to do that, which is why we suggested maybe going that route.
Okay.
But we are in the process of writing that needs assessment, that direction.
Other thoughts? I will say that going into negotiations, I am comfortable with what you've presented. I would be very uncomfortable actually adding back in contingency or taking any more money from what we're talking about at this point. I think we're in the beginning stages of trying to have a really open dialogue with our teachers union, and for us to make choices that are not relatively budget neutral at this time is going to really set that conversation back.
I'll just add to that this was presented to the budget committee that Melissa and I sit on, and there was no, and that is a pretty representative group of people. There was no request to increase the contingency numbers. Is that accurate?
At this point, I think they felt like there's not any real great options that we've come up with, but it's an option that would make sense moving forward if that's something that, knowing that the direction was to try to from last time was to be as budget neutral as possible.
Right.
And then as you want to make any changes to this, this is just giving you the groundwork to start from, and you can add to it, subtract to it. That's part of, direct us to go back and evaluate something new, and we'll just continue down the road. And this year, again, as we've talked, we're a little upside down on time, so hopefully as we move forward into next year, we can start really early in July and have some things more in place so that moving into this time after the first of the year, we can have some of those results back as far as what's making a difference.
I mean, I'll just say I agree with both Jessica and Shannon. It's a really weird thing to say, that to agree with both of them at the same time. But that, I don't know that I'm comfortable going forward with no contingency, because we've used it as, every year. But I agree with Jessica that I think us to make decisions that aren't budget neutral as we go into negotiations, especially this style of negotiations, I think puts us at a bad position. And I think starting off as budget neutral as possible, but at least trying to state the case that we're not comfortable with no contingency based on historical precedent, I think is the best we can do.
Makes sense.
And I don't disagree with what you said either. I think you're right about that. I think where I feel a little bit of discomfort is that historically, this would not have worked over the past many years. We've used more than 3 contingency. I can't think of a year that I've been on the board, unless I'm just forgetting, where we haven't needed more than 3 contingency teachers. So I guess what I would like to see would be what, if we go forward with this as our baseline, what are we going to do? Because I don't think that the community and our parents are going to feel like it's an acceptable answer to say, sorry, you've got 36 kids in your kid's 5th grade classroom because we didn't plan for any additional teachers. And that's one of those cases where the parent's going to, come to us and say that. I'm going to say, yeah, you're right. That's not okay. And I don't like having to say that. So what else can we do in a budget neutral fashion to deal with that, is what I would really like to see. But I'm personally not comfortable, and I'm okay going forward with this. I don't want to make a motion tonight. So that's kind of where I am.
So are you suggesting that we go back and look and see if there's a way to build in?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, because this has been a struggle. It's a struggle every year, and it's even more of a struggle right now because of all of the competing pressures on the budget for this new money. So I guess I don't.
I hear you, Shannon. I even agree with you. I just also would say that from my perspective, I would want us to be going through our line item budget, thinking through how we could free up money for all sorts of things, including teacher salary, para salary, et cetera, let alone adding to the contingency pool. So, and I'm confident that Kathy has been doing that work. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at. I would like to sort of add to the pressure of making sure that we are really going through and streamlining our money so that we can use it for the things we need to, like class size and salaries.
And even going so far as, I mean, we had some discussion about this a few meetings ago. Even going so far as rethinking where we have FTE in our elementary buildings.
Right.
Because I'm glad that there are opportunities for us to have small class sizes. On the flip side, I can understand why there are parents who look at that and go, well, you're not meeting my needs by having my first grader in a class of 27 kids and having another first grade classroom where there's 15. So if we think that we have real opportunities to think differently about that, and that could help us with this discussion, I'm all for having that dialogue at the board level around the budget. I mean, maybe it's not something that we're able to do this year. Maybe that's just too much. But I think it's an issue that is continuing to be very important to parents.
I think the fact of the matter is that we're not growing as we would like to be able to support some of these things, and the critical conversation has to come down to what are we willing to do differently to meet some of the obligations that we know we need to meet in terms of class size. Dealing with the way we staff our buildings, that has to be looked at, from a different lens in terms of, 2, 3, 4 round schools, but then you go across town and you have small class sizes. And so from a standpoint of equity, or from a standpoint of, making sure that I live in this neighborhood, I bought this house in this neighborhood, I want to make sure that my child has a small class size. We can't keep making the same decisions that we've been making in the past. And it's going to cause for some, and I think it was mentioned a couple of board meetings ago, it's going to cause for us to really come to the table and just make some decisions, some tough decisions that we know that's in the best interest of all of our students.
Because there are, on the flip side, I want to acknowledge there are equity considerations around. There's a reason why we have our staffing ratio set differently for our low-income schools, and that's the right thing to do. So how do you? That's why this is so difficult, and I guess I'm not suggesting that I know the answer. I'm just sharing the things that are running through my head about this, because it's very difficult to have those conversations with parents.
And I think there's an opportunity too for our 3 elementary schools that are beginning the planning stages of redesign, where we are in this position because we are packing these 30 students into this 5th grade level class. Is that the best place for them?
Why do we have to do it that way?
Right.
So I do need, as Dave reminded me, I do need at least consensus to say that we can move ahead, and I do need consensus to move ahead so that we can actually hire what we've described for those 12. So that doesn't mean that we can't come back and add contingency or do, but at least consensus with as it's presented. Can we go ahead and get the elementary in place and kind of look at it the way it was?
Especially if we want to hire effective staff.
Because it does put them behind. So I do need consensus, so at least can put it in the minutes and make sure we have, we're good to move forward with what was presented.
I guess the other thing I would say, kind of to this conversation, is there's no guarantees on any level that this IBB is going to work like we hope it will work. But it does have the potential of creating a space where suggestions can be made and suggested to the board to consider. And I think that that's hopeful, because for the first time ever, we're in the same room having conversations about the data and spending, and as we don't negotiate the budget, and we understand that, this creates a space where we can have much more candid conversations about decisions that we do make as a district regarding the budget and how it actually impacts everything.
And I'm really glad that we're moving forward with that model. I think it's the right thing to do. So.
And this year is going to be, I don't think it's
I mean,
going to be
what I was gonna say.
perfect, right?
Right.
Because we're just.
It's a work in progress.
We're too far, we're kind of so pushing, but if we could get through this year without like deciding it was a failure, and continue doing this work, I think that we can start into next year. I know, right, I know. I'm really setting expectations.
Just making sure that we have success by any measure, right?
Well, I think but what I'm saying is that if we can start that work, like Kathy, implied, it's sort of in July, like right after we kind of come up with something that we can agree on this time and just go right into it again, then it's going to allow for a lot of good things. We were talking, Sam Marie was talking earlier, ideally we'd be able to kind of think about hiring more months before now, right? And so just thinking through all of that. And so I think Lori's with me. We're skeptically hopeful.
Right, and I would say that this year we have like our timeline is not perfect. It's less than perfect. But next year you can envision that these conversations will come up and we will have more time to evaluate these decisions and be able to respond quicker at this time of year when we're looking at contingency considerations and other considerations as well that will start the process, as Jessica mentioned, much earlier.
Because done properly, IBV is really a year-round process, right? It's not something that you just start doing in February and end in May or June or.
I also think
We're
too,
at that place right now where we're kind of like, okay, everybody needs all this information, and so we're just trying to absorb it all and get on the same page, and hopefully next year we're going to be doing that in a much more kind of less panicky time frame,
To follow up on what Dr. Lewis said, I think there's, whatever word you want to use, fortitude, a stomach for it, whatever. I think there's those things right now currently on the board to look at different ways to solve the class size issue other than find a hot spot, hire a teacher, and put them in a room. I think we have the means and the motivation to have some of those difficult conversations that have been avoided, not been wanted to have because they're difficult. I think we are willing to have them and willing to explore them, to look at them, be it whatever they may be, but I think we're willing to have them.
Or avoid it because we've just always done it that way.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do we have somebody who's willing to make this motion?
Well, and I don't know if it needs to be a motion or just consensus, but Dave wants me to make sure, it's everything on this.
How do you want to get consensus?
And everything on this page.
What would you prefer, Dave?
I am willing to say I'm on board with this in a consensus fashion. Yes.
Okay, Kelly?
I'm good.
Rick? Sure. Yes. You are?
Yep.
I am as well. Is that good enough?
The whole thing.
Yes.
Okay, we're good.
As presented with it fairly budget neutral, yes. Okay. Do we need to discuss anything else this evening?
I really like how the directions our district is going. Seeing the redesign with English, I didn't have a positive, I would say, relationship with English throughout my whole curriculum, through all my years. I didn't feel like there was a certain thing that they were honing in on, so I feel like they're trying to establish right now, and I really like that. I really like the issue of, the issue of the budget, and how it's developing, as you say, and how it would be a year-long thing. I like the...
You're kind of geeking out on our school board meeting. I like it. Thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a move to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well,